I sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking my city like a comic book vigilante. The solitude I'd sought when I'd come here hadn't materialized. I wanted silence. I wanted the world to be quiet, if only for a moment, so I could gather my thoughts. Even up here, I could see the noise of the city. I could feel the buzz of its life, a bustling life. Below me, the sounds of that life echoed through the air, finding me. I could not escape it. Only death could provide the silence I needed. I could hear the loud howling of sirens, as if lamenting the fate of an unfortunate victim. Airplanes rumbled through the air. Even the unseen animals around me seemed to be in turmoil. The hooting of owls, the howling of coyotes, even the barking of domestic dogs filled the air. In the distance, city lights flickered with untold stories. Some of them would be erotic. Others would be violent and sordid. There were even stories that combined both. Literally thousands upon thousands of stories were unfolding at this very moment. For example, at the beginning of the evening, a woman was laying out her clothes for a date. Her obscenely large closet had an extensive closet from which to choose. She settled on a new cocktail dress she had recently purchased. When she'd bought it, she hadn't had any plans for the event. She just saw it, wanted to have it, and bought it without a second thought. She often did things this way. The numbers on the price tag were immaterial to her. She hardly even looked at it. No matter how many times she used her credit card, she was never turned down. It was almost like magic, an endless well that never ran dry. This happy woman was preparing to look her best. She wanted her companion to appreciate her beauty. And what woman doesn't want that? Her $150 perfume was ready to be sprayed in key places for a subtle but intoxicating scent. She took a long, leisurely bath with scented bath salts. Then she carefully styled her hair and applied her makeup with the precision of an artist. Afterward, she dressed in front of the full-length mirror, making sure everything was perfect. Her cell phone rang, interrupting the ceremony. She cast a quick glance at the screen, smiled understandingly, and answered with a throaty, seductive greeting. The conversation was short, but there were plenty of hints in it. Finished tidying herself up, she took one last spin in front of the mirror. She liked her reflection and smiled confidently. She left the room and, bouncing in place, headed out into the night. Why did I describe her preparation in such detail? Because how meticulously she prepared for a night out was very strange, considering the fact that her husband was out of town. Is it possible for a woman to prepare like that for a casual date with friends? Of course, it was possible. However, in this case, it was unlikely. How do I know? Because I knew the woman, and more importantly, the person she was going to meet. I understood why she waited until her husband was out of town before making plans with this man. Her flirtatious conversation confirmed my worst fears. She had opened doors to areas within me that I didn't even know existed. Anger, hatred. I was disgusted to even think about it. She disgusted me. I loved her with everything I had. I owed her everything. But right now, she was everything I hated about women. I know I shouldn't think that way. Men are taught to respect women. It's our job to love, protect, and cherish them, even understand them. It's probably too difficult a task for most men, but we try anyway. We are taught to put women on a pedestal. Even at an early age, boys are indoctrinated that girls are sugar and spice and all that. The very first woman we meet is our mother who gave birth to us. And then we choose as our life partner the woman who we hope will bear us children. These beneficent acts are supposed to make us feel honored. But when you think about it, the story turns out to be incomplete. After all, do they create life on their own? So what do we owe women really? Respect? Absolutely. The same respect we should have for people in general. But why do so many people think we owe them more respect than men? They don't say it in so many words, but society in general values women's lives more highly than men's. In sitcoms and comedies about family life, wives are always portrayed as hot, smart women who have the unpleasant duty of cleaning up after the bumbling troublemakers they're married to or fixing their messes. Father knows best has been replaced by Everybody Loves Raymond. I'm not casting aspersions on that show, I like it. It's just an example. What does all of this mean? It means that we treat the ladies as if everything they do and say is non-judgmental. What they say should be taken as gospel, even if it isn't. They are only wrong when they want to admit it. In fact, forced to admit it after exhausting all other options. Other times, men are told to keep their mouths shut if they want peace. Why has doubting women or holding them responsible for what they say or do become synonymous with misogyny? They do this to us all the time. Why is a double standard wrong unless it's in favor of the weaker sex? When men cheat, they are labeled as the worst kind of people. When women cheat, it is often assumed that her husband has let her down. Calling a man an asshole is part of pop culture. Why am I delusional? Do I hate women? Is this the whiny monologue of a hurt man who now looks at the opposite sex with contempt? Am I a misogynist? Do you see how fair questions turn into labeling? Before you stop reading and write me off as some woman-hating, anti-feminist asshole, I should tell you why I'm sitting on this cliff asking these questions. This afternoon, my entire view of the world was completely shattered. Everything I was taught in my youth was turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Everything my parents told me about marriage was a lie. My mom told me lies about what to expect if you treat women well. My father told me lies about being a real man. They shaped my idea of what life should be like when I got married. They are the reason I've been sitting on the edge of this cliff, literally and figuratively. I think I need to go back to the beginning. Maybe then we can understand how I got here. We can see how I ended up on this cliff. 4 years ago. That's a good woman you got there, son. Take care of her. Respect her. Be the kind of man I taught you to be. My father glowed with pride as he said this to me. He pulled me to him and gave me a manly hug, patting me sternly on the back. I will, Dad. I will. After a brief hug, we pulled away. Standing in one of the back rooms of the church, dressed in matching tuxedos, we waited for the appointed time to walk down the aisle toward my future. I could hear the excited hum of the crowd in the sanctuary. Where's Mom? He smiled and hummed. You know your mom. She's barking orders at the bridesmaids, driving everyone crazy. Even the priest got a taste. A look of concern appeared on my face. Daddy, please don't let her drive Tabby crazy, especially not today. This is about me and her, not Mom. You know how she gets when everything has to be perfect. Son, relax. Your mom is just excited and trying to make sure everything goes well. She's been dreaming of this moment since she first held you in her arms. Daddy? Son, look at me, my dad interrupted me in a stern voice, placing both hands on my shoulders. He took a deep breath, showing that he wanted me to do the same. I followed his example. You're nervous. I know what you're going through. I've been through it myself. Every man goes through it. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. I nodded in agreement with his words and took another deep breath. Calm down, he continued. There's nothing to stop Tabby from marrying you. Nothing. She loves the hell out of you. Not even your mother could drive her crazy enough to change her mind. You're right, I said, trying to calm my nerves. My stomach was in knots. This was that moment, the moment of truth. I would dedicate my life to Tabitha and officially vow to always be faithful to her. I loved Tabby with all my heart. I didn't want any woman but her. And yet the thought of being her husband for the rest of my life was a little overwhelming. After all, I was only 23. If I lived to be 85, the rest of my life would be 62 years. What if my love for her wasn't strong enough? What if I wasn't a good enough husband? What if she looks back and realizes she made a terrible mistake marrying me? What if someone better comes along? What if... My father must have read my dark thoughts. Once again, he brought me out of them. I want you to think about me and your mom. Look at us. I've been married to her for 17 years, and not a day goes by that I don't regret it. You and her are the most precious thing I have, and without you, my life would be empty. I love her as much as I did when I saw her in her wedding dress. She's my everything. Things haven't always been easy between us. After all, I'm 9 years older than her. Because of the age difference, we have a hard time at times. We fight, we quarrel, but we always get through it. She knows I'm not going anywhere. After all is said and done, we each know we have a partner for life. Nothing can keep us apart. I won't let it, and neither will she. Trust me, son, this is what you want. When you wake up decades from now and your son is walking down the aisle, you'll be proud to tell him the same thing. Tears came to my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had pride, after all. Instead, I gave a quick snort, and to avoid an awkward display of emotion, I jokingly asked, "What if I have a girl?" It took him a moment to realize what I had done, but he agreed. He smiled and said, "Then you'll keep trying until you have a boy. I want a grandson." "Yes, sir, I'll do it for you." When I said that, his face contorted a little, and I asked, "Too much?" "Yes, a little," he quickly replied with a short nod. We then burst into laughter as he shook his head in feigned disgust. I was so glad he was here with me again. I couldn't have picked a better best man. He was the only man I considered at all. Even my best friend Robbie was no comparison to my father. Henry was technically my stepfather. My real father left when I was 2 years old. I never found out the exact circumstances under which he decided to leave us. My mother mentioned him as rarely as possible. The only thing I can remember, vaguely, is that my stepfather married my mother when I was 6, and they dated for a year before that. So Henry was the only father I knew. He was an example of what a real man should be. The wedding went off without a hitch. Tabby was truly the most beautiful woman in the room. When I saw her, all my doubts melted away. I knew I'd made the best choice. I recited my vows to her, reading every word. I listened to her say hers. Tears of happiness flowed from her eyes. When I was finally able to kiss my bride, I made a promise to myself to never let her go. And I never let go. Throughout all 4 years of my marriage, my parents have been there for me. For both of us. They helped us through our first major fight. My mom taught Tabby how to cook Thanksgiving meals, and my dad was always there to give me advice. Our marriage was what it was meant to be, and my parents played a big part in that. I tried to be as much of a husband to Tubby as Dad was to Mom. His favorite saying was, "A happy wife is a happy life." He lived his life by that motto. He taught me the importance of always taking care of your woman. I know now that it was all a load of crap. The present. Until today, I thought my father was the wisest man on earth. Until today, I tried to model my marriage after his and my mom's. Until today, I had everything. I had a beautiful life with a beautiful wife. Both my parents were alive. I worked side by side with my father, who owned a chain of computer stores. Our stores repaired computers, but our most profitable business was selling custom computers and components over the internet. Most of our customers were avid gamers or people who needed quality computers. Our website was designed to help the customer find what they needed, whether they were a computer guru or someone assembling their first computer. We had it all worked out. Was I really just blind? Had I not noticed all the warning signs? Was life so good that trouble was impossible? As I looked over the edge of the cliff, I saw nothing but utter darkness directly below me. Faint city lights flickered and danced in the distance, but beneath my feet I was met with nothing but nothingness. No answers. No escape from the crushing realization I was facing. What was I supposed to do? How could I continue the relationship knowing that everything it was built on was a lie? Today afternoon. I love Sundays. My weeks revolved around them. Most people live on Saturdays, but I don't think those people are married. My Saturdays were meant for Tabby. These were the days I did my favors for her. Nice to-do lists, date nights, shopping so I could give my manly opinion, as well as a credit card. Whatever she needed, I was there for her. But Sunday was the holiest day, and I don't mean church. I could do whatever I wanted on Sunday. It was a kind of unwritten rule that just fell into place. Tabby understood this, albeit subconsciously, so she usually found something else to do. In the colder months, I had football. In the summer, I took leisurely rides on my Ducati. Other than that, I worked on my truck, went to the gym, hung out with my best friend Robbie, or just sat in my boxers and did nothing. Sounds pretty fantastic, doesn't it? This Sunday was supposed to be the exception to the rule. My dad and I had to go out of town to meet with representatives of a company that had just acquired one of our major suppliers. One of the buyer's first moves was to raise the prices on many of the parts we purchased from them. This would have a big impact on our profit margin. So my father arranged a meeting at one of the central locations. He brought me along with him, as well as a few other key people. We planned to negotiate and try to come to acceptable terms. Since we had a long-standing relationship with the former company, we hoped that we would be able to accomplish this. For me, it was an opportunity to get to know the other guys as well as the new owners. I actually didn't know the other guys as well as my dad would have liked. Most of them were his age, so I didn't have much to hold on to. Besides, in their minds, I was just his son. Nothing more. Since I had started working with my father, he had been preparing me for a more active role. This was the perfect opportunity to reintroduce me to them as a key figure. As fate would have it, this meeting was to take place on the worst possible weekend. On Super Bowl weekend Lee. The Patriots had gotten their way, once again, and I wanted to see Tom Brady make history with his 5th championship. Even though I knew the game wouldn't be all that interesting, and that the Patriots would just defeat the Falcons early, I wanted to see it. The meet was on Saturday, so the plan was to fly into the central location on Friday, have the meet on Saturday, and fly back Sunday morning. Robbie always threw the best Super Bowl parties. Indeed, he threw the best parties in general. That was his thing. He was the fun friend, and I was the responsible one. That dynamic hadn't changed since my high school days. We had a long tradition of watching the big games together. NBA Finals, Super Bowls, Final Four, etc. And we were both big Patriots fans. They've been to 6 Super Bowls since Robbie started the tradition, and the 2 times I missed the party, they lost. My friends blame me for those losses. They really did. If you don't follow sports, you won't understand. If you do, you can feel my pain. I should have been there. You know what they say about best laid plans. As luck would have it, there were no flights home before the match. All the tickets were booked. The only thing to do was, of course, to reschedule. That's what I thought. But the representatives of the new company had other plans. No amount of persuasion to reschedule the meeting worked. They had busy schedules, and this was the only free time they had. Coincidentally, they were from Dallas. I'm sure their lack of interest in the Super Bowl had nothing to do with the Cowboys botching it once again. My dad tried to cheer me up. He decided to throw a Super Bowl party in the suite we were renting. It was a nice gesture, and I tried to be grateful, but I was still depressed. Nevertheless, I was a team player. I put on a manly face and brought my game. We arrived on Friday, and each of us strategized on how to approach the meet. We wanted to make sure we were alert and sharp as a razor. The next day, we had a meeting. Funny thing is, we spent so much time practicing our game plan that we unwittingly began to see the reps as the enemy. We were prepared to play hardball and didn't believe a word they said. The reality turned out to be somewhat anticlimactic. They were human beings just like us. They didn't come in expensive suits and condescending attitudes. They were warm, polite, open, and even joked with us. However, when we got to the point of negotiating, things got serious. We told them what we wanted. They told us what they could do. My father politely pointed out our reputation and how much business we had done with their predecessors. He hinted that they wouldn't want to lose the business if they couldn't satisfy us. The reps had to get on the phone with their main office, and we eventually came to a favorable resolution. The assholes in Washington could learn a lot from small businesses that disagree, but listen to each other. Eventually, they compromise and solve the problem in a way that satisfies everyone. But we're not politicians, are we? If it were easy, anyone could do it, but I digress. We were very happy with the way things went. Although I should have been happier, I was still very upset that I missed the party. A real party. I know my dad meant well, but Robbie's parties always turn out great. He knew how to make a bar mitzvah fun. Hanging out with a bunch of old people in a suite seemed incomparable. On top of that, if the Pats lost, I'd be in deep shit. Not that there was any risk of them losing. The game probably would have been over in the first half. But you can never be too careful. Eventually, Dad suggested I take a plane to a neighboring town, rent a car, and just drive the rest of the way home. I might not make it in time for the kickoff, but at least I could make it in time for the second half with a friend. You know, that's why I love it. I was able to change my flight, after shelling out a tidy sum to the airline, of course, and book a compact car for the trip. My dad and the other guys still wanted to stay and watch the game in the suite. They were veteran husbands. You know the kind of guys. They've been married for over a decade. They cherish the time away from the old ball and chain and squeeze out every ounce of freedom they can get. That's why I was able to get home early. Isn't that what always happens when some momentous discovery is made? Damn cliches. I hate them. In the end, it's always the little decisions that add up. Maybe it's fate or just happenstance, but often we find that a small deviation from the intended path can have huge consequences. I practically created a sonic boom with a Nissan Versa I rented while rushing down the highway. I didn't realize these cars could go so fast. I listened to the game on the radio and was not happy. Not happy. The score was 14-0, and the Falcons had just thrown an interception. I had to make it in time. I knew Robbie and the rest of my buddies were cursing the ground I was walking on. By the time I got home, it was almost half an hour later, and I found that Tabby wasn't home. I was hoping to surprise her, but then I remembered that she and my mom were supposed to be spending this weekend together. I called her cell phone. She picked up on the second ring and greeted me as usual. We had a fairly normal conversation. I decided not to let her know I was home. I figured if I kept my mouth shut, I wouldn't be expected to be at the house before curfew. I could make it to Robbie's before the second half started, and then hang out with my buddies late as I wanted. Hell, I could even stay at Robbie's for the night, which gave me the green light to drink myself into oblivion. With the score the way it was now, it seemed necessary. By the time she realizes there's been a change of plans, if she finds out at all, I can just play dumb and apologize for forgetting to let her know. Everyone who reads this story can salvage their decision. I'm sure hundreds of other men have done this, and worse. I was preparing to end the conversation. I was thinking of a good exit strategy to go to Robbie. I asked, "You're with your mom, right?" I assumed I was, so I wasn't looking for an answer. It was just a good exit to tell her, "Have fun and I'll see you later." Yeah, I'm with my mom," she said in a strange voice after some hesitation. For some reason, it immediately piqued my interest. The hesitation seemed strange, and the tone of her voice indicated a lie. Becoming a little more attentive, I asked, "Are you at our house or my parents'?" I looked around the empty house to see if she'd take the bait. "At their house. Why?" she asked, a little defensive. I almost breathed a sigh of relief that she didn't say, "at our place," but then I noticed her tone was aggressive. At first I was curious, but now I was wary. Something was definitely off about her. It was one of those things that are hard to describe, but if you know the person, you can sense it. "No reason. Just miss you, that's all," I said, trying to break the tension. I didn't want to get into an argument. I knew how this conversation would go, and it would inevitably lead to me being upset, but getting nowhere. "Do you guys have anything planned?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yeah, you know us. We're quite the party people," she joked sarcastically. Then she said, "Hey, I gotta go." Was it just me? Or was she rushing me to answer? All right, sweetie. Be sure to use protection if you pick up any strange guy. I love you and we'll talk soon, I said before we ended the conversation. We used to joke like that a lot, so I didn't pay much attention to it. It was like that until there was a pause before she replied again. I love you too, Dre. Bye. I had already grabbed my keys and headed for the exit. Why was she acting so weird? I had to find out. My parents' house wasn't too far away from Robbie's house, so I wouldn't be stopping by on my way out. I didn't want to give up my freedom, but something was annoying me. I had to take the risk. I got to my people's house and, since I had a key, quietly went inside. I expected to see Mom and Tabby in the living room, but it was empty. I quietly went upstairs to see if they were in the bedroom watching TV or something. I didn't find them there either, but I did find something else. The bedroom was pretty big, so my mom didn't notice when I opened the door slightly. She was standing in front of the mirror, holding a dress in front of her. It was a cocktail dress. I tried to discreetly look around for my wife, but I didn't see her. Some part of me wanted to make my presence known, but something was wrong. My intuition told me to be quiet for a while and wait, which I did. I just watched her. She hummed while looking at herself. In the background, I could hear the murmuring of the water in the bathtub. On her dressing table were various cosmetics lying around as if they were being prepared for application. For a woman whose husband was out of town, it seemed strange. My world crumbled when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, smiled, and picked up. "What is it, Charles?" she said with feigned irritation. Her voice was flirty and playful. I gasped, feeling the sickening punch of Bernard Hopkins hit my stomach. Charles was my biological father's name. My mom never talked about him. She refused to answer any questions about him. I always assumed he was long gone. Was this the same Charles? If so, why was she talking to him, and in that tone of voice? And if it was a different Charles, the questions remained the same. It got worse. "You've been impatient for the entire 30 years I've known you, and it doesn't get any better," she said again in the same tone, answering my question and confirming my fears. "I'm already getting ready." She listened for a moment and then giggled. "Oh my God, you're so bad. No, I'm not doing this, okay? I'm not a street hooker, you know." Another listen. Then a giggle. "Yes, but it's not that easy with me, at least not always. I admit that your charms have a certain effect on me. But I am a married woman. It's not easy enough for you to keep your hands to yourself as it is." She listened for another moment, and then her face darkened. "Stop it. Stop it now. I'm married to him, okay? You had your chance with me, and you blew it. You abandoned me. I loved you with everything I had to give, and you just walked away. I still love you, I admit that. But I'm a lot smarter now than I was then. I may not love Henry the same way, but that doesn't mean I'd leave him to be with you. Love isn't everything. I've learned that through experience. You taught me that. So don't think that just because I give in to you every now and then, you get a second chance. We have fun. That's all. If you can't accept that, then feel free to leave. You don't have to leave this time." At that moment, my heart died. My mother, the woman I thought all women should emulate, had turned out to be a liar. She was a liar and a cheat. She was the kind of woman I was advised to stay away from. How could she do that to my father? How could she do that to me? After all these years of lecturing me on how to treat women and telling me to look up to my father as an example of a real man. Is that how women treat real men? I should have confronted her. I should have stormed into the room yelling and screaming at her. But I didn't. I couldn't. No matter what she did, she was still my mom. So I left. I just hid, got in my car, and drove away. I drove aimlessly for a while until I stopped at this cliff. What was I supposed to do? I wanted to stay on solid ground, figuratively speaking. I wanted to return to my naive existence, but it was gone. They say there are moments that make you grow up. The death of a parent, the serious illness of a loved one, or the breakup of a close relationship usually tops that list. I was lucky in that respect. I was spared these tragedies, at least for the moment. But it was just as bad. This was my moment, my crisis. I felt 10 years older than I had a few hours earlier when I rented a car to drive home. I couldn't bring myself to do what I knew I had to do. I was supposed to jump. I had to fall towards the death that awaited me. The death I spoke of was not physical. The death that awaited me was the death of the ideals I had been taught. The death of a little boy who thought his parents were perfect. I didn't know what would end up at the bottom, how I would land, or what the consequences would be. All I knew was that something had to die. I had to jump and accept what was right in front of my face. I had to tell my dad. He had to find out. It would hurt him and probably make Mom furious. Oddly enough, she hadn't raised me to be a liar. I wasn't going to start doing that just because she was. I would tell the truth. Having made my decision, I got back in my car and drove home. It was getting pretty late. I had completely forgotten that I was supposed to be out of town and that I was missing Super Bowl LI, which I later regretted. Those who saw it know what I mean. When I walked in the door, Tabby was home. She looked at me twice before greeting me. "Honey, I thought you were coming back tomorrow," she said, hugging me. "I did, but it didn't go as expected," I muttered, taking off my coat. I walked over to the couch and sat down. Suddenly, I felt tired. It was like the whole world was resting on my shoulders. "Did everything go well?" she asked with concern in her voice, sitting down next to me. I didn't answer her anything. I just shook my head, and tears started dripping from my eyes. "Andre, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Is your dad okay?" All I could do was shake my head. Then she asked in a trembling voice, "Is he home?" I was so exhausted I almost let it pass my ears. It was something so insignificant that it could have been ignored. But my senses were attuned. Even subconsciously, I was looking for all the clues I'd missed over the years. I looked into Tabby's eyes. The hesitation in her voice when she asked if my father was home spoke volumes, but the look in her eyes finally confirmed my suspicions. She knew. "Where have you been today?" I asked sharply, abruptly changing my entire appearance. The haggard voice was replaced by a stern, inquisitive, perhaps questioning tone. My eyes narrowed as I looked at her. The tears had stopped. I was still sad, but I was quickly starting to get angry. I remembered our previous conversation. She said she was with my mother at her house. That had been a lie. "Huh?" she asked. The look on her face could have expressed bewilderment, but I saw fear. "Tonight, when I called, I asked where you were. You said you were with your mom. Remember?" Uh, oh yeah. Hmm. I was with her." She spoke quickly, her eyes darting from side to side. "How long were you with her? What did you do? When did you leave?" I asked, not even trying to hide the accusatory tone of the questions. She looked at me nervously, picking her words. "Andre, we... why are you acting like this?" "Just answer the questions, Tabby. They should be easy." "Andre, just answer the damn questions!" I yelled furiously, jumping up from the couch like it was on fire. My fists were clenched so hard that my knuckles turned red. Her face turned into a mask of fear and horror. She looked at me with eyes so wide you'd think she was wearing bifocal glasses. She sat stunned at first, but then she suddenly jumped up from the couch and ran into our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I collapsed back onto the couch as all the energy drained from my body. I just sat there, letting the realization of what was happening overwhelm me. Finding out about my mother was a disaster. Knowing that Tabby was involved was even worse. About 15 minutes later, she reappeared in the living room doorway. I didn't even hear her approaching footsteps. "You know, right?" she asked, voicing the stupidest question I'd ever heard. "And so do you," I replied curtly. I didn't look at her. but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her nodding sadly. Her expression was wistful, and streaks of tears were running down her makeup. So were you going to tell me, or were you going to keep lying? I asked with an eerie calm. Andre, it's not that simple. Really? I turned to face her, looking her in the eye. It's not that simple? That's your answer for lying to me? Honey, I just didn't want you to get hurt. She's your mother. You look up to her. I knew it would kill you. That excuse pissed me off. Bullshit, Tabby! Bullshit! You weren't just lying to protect me. You were covering for her. Tears streamed down her face again, and she cried silently. Usually her tears moved me, but now I just didn't care. It's not like that. I mean, I lied to you, but She tried to explain. Coming up with nothing, she sighed sadly and moved her hair out of her face. I hated lying to you, Dre, she finally said, lowering her gaze. I sighed and shook my head. More bullshit, Tabby. You had no problem lying to me. No problem at all. You did it so convincingly that it makes me wonder what else you were lying about. The crying stopped when I said that. She wiped her wet cheeks and snorted, but her eyes narrowed as they fell on me. What does that mean? She asked with a note of anger in her voice. I didn't answer at first. I could see we were at an impasse. I could put off this conversation until my feelings were more stable. Maybe that's what I should have done. But you know what? She was the one who lied to me, who knows how many times. She was the one who was wrong. I'm tired of being the scapegoat for the women in my life. I'm tired of being the guy who always puts their feelings before my own. That's Daddy's way. Look at what he's accomplished. You never answered my question. Where were you today? What are you implying? She asked, taking a defiant step forward. Her eyes stopped on mine. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you a question, one that you still haven't given me a straight answer to. I was with my mom, if you must know, she said reproachfully. Do you mind if I call her to confirm your story? She looked like I'd punched her in the face. So now you don't trust me? Was she really offended that I didn't trust her after catching her in an outright lie? Really? Why would I trust a liar? I asked coldly. There was such anger building up in her after those words that I wouldn't be surprised if steam came out of her ears and a whistling sound was heard. You know what? You know what? She screamed. Her lips tightened as she spoke. I waited for the second half of her words, but it never came. I wasn't sure if she was too angry to finish, or if she just didn't have any plans other than, you know what. Instead, she just glared at me. I wasn't done yet. Speaking of being a liar, have you ever cheated on me? She laughed sarcastically, putting her hands on her hips and shaking her head. Then her face contorted into a wicked smile. No, Andre, I never cheated on you. I'm not a whore. Only your mother does that, she said, mocking me. There are no words to describe the surge of emotions that rushed through me. Her words hit the target with sniper precision. I was so angry that I couldn't think of something so clever to say back to her. I couldn't even argue with her words, which made me even angrier. She crossed her arms and smirked, daring me to reply. She knew she had done me good. Her arrogant demeanor pissed me off even more. Screw you, Tabby! You're a goddamn liar! Worse, you lied to protect the woman who's cheating on you. If a liar defends another liar who is cheating, it's logical to assume that the first liar is also cheating. Her face reflected a mixture of confusion and annoyance, and she croaked, "What?" in a high, squeaky voice. She made it sound like my words were so ridiculous that they couldn't be answered. Let me make it easy for you. Birds of the same feather cheat together. You had no problem defending a cheater, which leads me to believe you see no problem with it. Hell, you even made sure it happened by providing an alibi. The only person who would do that is someone who doesn't mind cheating. Tabby was about to issue a rebuttal, but changed her mind. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Andre, I know today has been a big shock to you. Do you understand? I understand. Now you're saying things you don't mean. So why don't we just go to bed and put this conversation off until later? I don't want us to say things we can't take back. Her voice was comforting in an attempt to reassure me. I saw it as patronizing. No, Tabby, no, you can't do this. I jabbed my finger in the air, pointing at her. You lied to me. Do you understand that? Do you get that? You goddamn lied to me. To your goddamn husband. You lied to me to protect her. You don't get it, because I have never lied to you. So don't sit here and patronize me like I'm some out of control kid who needs a timeout. That's not what I was doing, Andre. She stepped forward and tried to touch me. I backed away from her like her skin was made of acid and slid past her. I heard her call my name and ran out the door, slamming it behind me. When I saw her silhouette in the doorframe, I was already pulling out of the driveway. With a squeal of tires, she became a speck in my rearview mirror. Next chapter. Andre, I heard some disturbing news today. I was lying on my bed playing Street Fighter II on my Super Nintendo when my mom walked into my room. She stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips, a disappointed look on her face. What have I done? I asked in an annoyed tone. I mentally checked the list that all high school students make when their parents are vague about what offense they committed. Was it time for the report card? No, not for another month. Did I forget to do the dishes? I didn't clean it, but we haven't had dinner yet. Did I get reprimanded again? No. Since I got in trouble for stink bomb in the women's restroom, I keep my nose clean. I heard you brought Christina Huntsmith to tears the other day. Care to tell me what that was about? I was relieved that I wasn't in real trouble, so I carelessly replied, Oh, nothing much. We dated for a while, but I broke up with her. She started crying. That's all. Why did you break up with her? She asked. I racked my brain for a decent answer. Somehow I decided that saying, Christina doesn't hang out and Becky promised me something, wouldn't be too good. I just don't like her anymore, Mom. It's time to move on. I tried to be nice, but she got agitated and started crying. Is there another girl? Talking to my mom about this seemed weird. All I could do was look at her sheepishly and say, Yeah, I kind of like Becky now. And she looked at me like I'd said I kind of liked Hitler. Wait a minute, you don't mean Becky in a short skirt and top, do you? Yeah. Andre, why did you break up with a nice girl like Christina for this? Girl. Because we have more in common, I said out loud. She threw me an understanding look before sitting down on my bed. Andre, she paused, as if trying to think of the right way to say what she wanted to say. You can't treat girls like disposable toys. We're not here for you to play with when it suits you, and then toss us in the trash when a new, shinier one comes along. We're people with feelings. Yes, Mom, but what if your father had done that to me? She interrupted. What if he'd thrown me out because some other woman in a short skirt and halter top glared at him? What if he'd made me cry like you did with Christina and then shrugged it off like it was nothing? How would you feel about that? That silenced me. The image of my mom running away in tears gave me a sick feeling in my stomach. I wouldn't like it, I muttered. Exactly. Aren't you glad he's a man who doesn't treat women that way? Yes, I agreed crushingly. She smiled at me and lovingly stroked my head. Good. If you want an example of how women should be treated, look to Henry. Ask him questions. He's what a real man should be. When you treat a woman like a queen, she will always treat you like a king. Next chapter. I woke up abruptly. The dream, which was really just a memory from high school, stood before my eyes. Why was I dreaming about my mom? My foggy brain was a little confused as I looked around the unfamiliar room I was lying in. When my head cleared, memories came flooding back to me. After I left home last night, I had gotten a motel room. I couldn't get home to Tabby. Her numerous attempts to call me only resulted in me disconnecting the phone. Instead of dealing with her, I bought a 12-pack of beer and some questionable hot dogs at a nearby gas station. I then proceeded to eat my gourmet meal, responsibly washing it down with the beverage of my choice. Somehow I woke up with 10 empty beer cans. Upon returning, I turned on my phone to see what time it was. Surprisingly, it was a little after 9. Not surprisingly, there were about 20 missed calls, as well as 12 text messages. There were a few messages from my mom, which told me that Tabby had talked to her. No doubt Tabby had informed her that it had come to my attention that she was a round-heeled slut. She was probably on edge and hoping I wouldn't tell my dad. Okay, cell phone rings. I found one missed call from my dad. I didn't know what to make of it. Was he talking to my mom, or was he just calling to let me know he got there okay? I wanted to call him back, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to him. I wanted to tell him everything. He deserved to know. I was sure Mom hadn't told him anything, even if he had talked to her. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's like mercy killing a wounded animal. You know it's the right thing to do, but it's hard to follow through. I didn't want to destroy his world at all. After all, it drove me to the brink of insanity, and she's my mother. How would I feel if she was my wife? I decided to accept it. I didn't call him, but I did the following. I sent him a short text message to see what was on his mind. It said, "Get home, okay?" Figuring he wouldn't respond right away, I hopped in the shower to wash off the smell of a homeless movie buff. I felt refreshed until I realized I didn't have a change of clothes. That meant I'd have to wear the same smelly garb I'd spent all of yesterday in. A 3-hour flight, a 4-hour drive, and a pity party with 120 ounces of beer. Afterward, I checked my message to see if he had responded and found that he had. It said, "Where are you? Tubby is freaking out. Says you guys had a fight and left." So he had really spoken to them. No doubt those lying women missed the reason we quarreled. Now he thinks I'm the bad guy. That's great. Typical. Did I even know them? Were all women lying bitches? It was time to take the bull by the horns. I stopped dodging what I had to do. Like I said, he had a right to know. I sent one last text before I packed my things and left the room. It said, "Meet me at Tony's. Just you. Don't tell Mom or Tubby, please. It's important." I didn't wait for him to answer. I knew he would. I just walked to the counter to pay the bill, got in my truck, and drove to his place. He arrived 20 minutes after I did. I had already ordered his favorite pizza and drinks, and they were on the table a few minutes before he walked in. "Hey, son. Wow. Pizza for breakfast? What are you, on a diet?" he muttered, taking a seat in the booth. I wanted to reply cheerfully, but all I managed to do was adopt a solemn look. He sensed my mood, and his smile was replaced with a concerned look. "Come on, Dre. Talk to me. What's going on?" I tried to say the words, but they stuck in my throat. They didn't want to come out. They wanted to stay a dark secret, but I wouldn't let them. "Mom's cheating on you," I finally spit out. The words hung in the air, filling it with heaviness. It took a moment for them to reach consciousness. I saw the confused look on his face turn to recognition. "What?" he asked with disbelief in his voice. I didn't bother to say it again. I knew it wasn't necessary. He had heard me. More than that, he believed me. His rhetorical question was simply a reflex that my message had gotten through to him. I felt terrible. The pain reflected on his face indicated complete agony. I felt like undoing what I had just said. I wanted to jump up and yell, "Gotcha!" I had jumped off the cliff, and now there was no turning back. I wished I didn't have to drag him with me. "When did you find out?" he asked. His words seemed choppy and his voice sounded cracked. "Yesterday." He shook his head sadly. "Do you know who he is?" All I could do was nod. I was about to tell him, but he beat me to it with his next question. "Was it Charles?" I gasped. "How did you know?" I asked, completely stunned. My father was immersed in his own world. He sat up and shook his head violently. "I thought it was over. I thought she would eventually take it out on him. I waited. I was patient. I tried to be a good husband. I gave her freedom. Then he slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "That bitch!" "Dad," said I, stunned by his abrupt reply. He looked up at me. The expression on his face was strange. It was as if he was absent. He seemed surprised that I was still here. Why am I still paying for my mistakes? Why? I was doing everything right. Why is this still happening to me? He cried, his body trembling. Although he was looking at me, I don't think he was talking to me. His eyes glazed over, and he seemed somehow distant. I was instantly angry. Not at him, but at the situation. It made me angry that he thought it was his fault. I was angry at my mother for doing this to him. I was angry that I should have been the one to tell him. I was just furious. "Dad, it's not your fault," I said, trying to get through to him. He just shook his head. "Yes, it is, son. It's all my fault. It's karma. I tried to make it right. I've tried. But it always comes back." "What are you talking about? You don't understand anything, Dad. What did you do?" Henry, 23 years ago. The heart monitor beeped repeatedly. It must have been a blessing. Each beep was a sign that my daughter was still alive. No matter what it looked like, she was there. Somewhere out there. But she wasn't actually there. Her body was physically here, performing its daily functions as if everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Everything Cassie was, her essence, was gone. Her body was just an empty shell full of moving parts. "Please come back to me. Please. I've already lost your mom. I can't lose you too." I thought about it for the billionth time, squeezing her hand. What I wouldn't give to feel movement in the dead hand I was holding. Honestly, I would have given everything I owned for my girl to open her eyes for even 5 minutes and look at me one more time. But none of that mattered now. The long, hard decision had been made. Today was the day I was supposed to... Shit. I couldn't even bring myself to say it. As the impassioned doctors summarized and hypothesized about my daughter's condition and the likelihood that she would ever wake up, it all sounded so simple and dry, so cold, as if the mechanics were trying to convince me that it would cost more to repair my worthless car than it was worth. That's my daughter, damn it. My little girl. She's a human being, not some warm vestibule for storing donor organs. I wanted to be mad at the doctors. I wanted to be mad at the nurses. I even wanted to be mad at God. After all, he was the one who made it rain that night. It was his fault that a drunk driver was on the road at that exact time. He let that asshole run a red light and hit my wife and child. He took them away from me. But why did she even get behind the wheel that night? What was the reason she was on that road? Where was she going? Shut up. She was going to her mother's. She was supposed to be home with you, but she wasn't. She was leaving you. Shut up. She was leaving you because she caught you. She found the credit card statement you forgot to destroy. She saw the motel charges. You remember the motel, don't you? That's where you met that woman every Wednesday. You practically paid her rent from the money she charged you. Your wife knew you'd be there, paid the clerk for a spare key, and broke into the room. What did she see when she came in? What did she see? Shut the hell up. This is all my fault. Everything. I thought I was entitled to a little entertainment. After all, I was bringing in the big bucks. I was the owner of the house. My business started to grow. Everything fell into place. Everything was the way it should be. The only snag was my frigid wife. She was a wonderful wife and a wonderful mother. She believed in me when everyone else said I was crazy to start this business. It was the 90S. Real estate was the place to be. Why not go where the money was? But she knew I could make it work. Even when we lived in that shabby apartment, she believed in me. I loved her with all my heart. Unfortunately, I no longer lusted after her. For her, sex was a duty she performed for her husband. It was on the same list as laundry and cooking, and not even at the top of the list. I wanted a queen. I found such a woman. She was an escort. I found her through an ad in the local paper. This was back before the internet made such things so much easier. Of course, she didn't advertise herself as a prostitute. You had to know the language to decipher the code. Woman seeking a man for a mutually beneficial relationship was the exact phrase in Amber's ad. The first time I called her, I was so nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but I ended up getting the best thing that ever happened in my life. She was exactly what I wanted in a goddess. At first, the time with Amber played on my conscience, but as time went on, it got easier. I found myself thinking about morals less and less often, and it turned into a weekly encounter that I craved. If I missed a week, I felt the consequences. My mood would sour, I would get testy. I even justified it in my head. It helped with the guilt. I still thought I was a good husband. I loved her and my daughter with everything I had. I spoiled them both. Everything they wanted, they got. I just had one thing I did. It was nothing special. After all the good I'd done for my family, it shouldn't have mattered much. But it did matter. She didn't see it as a gain. All she saw was betrayal. Pain. That's why she'd ended up on this road. That's why she died on the operating table. And it's why I said goodbye to my daughter before they pulled the plug. Andre is the present. My father's whole body shook with sobs. The only thing I could do was sit there in bewilderment. This man, the one who raised me, was not the man in that story. They say there comes a sad day in any child's life when they learn that their parents aren't perfect. It was I think sobering is the right word. It was a very sobering 24 hours. I wanted to sympathize with my dad, but could only selfishly think about how everyone I loved and held dear had let me down this weekend. One by one, they let me down. Piece by piece, they shattered my ideas of what marriage should be until there was nothing left. I had no truth to hold on to. Dad, I don't know what to say. That seemed to upset him even more. The crying got a new impetus, and he sobbed into his hands. I had never seen my father cry before. Never. I hadn't realized what it was until that moment. So that's why you put up with your mom cheating on you? Because you felt you deserved it? I asked. It's karma, son. You and your mom are my second chance. I owe it to my daughter to be the best father to you that I can be, and to Cynthia, first wife, to be a great husband to your mom. Dad, I paused half a word to gather my thoughts. I wanted to find a PC appropriate way to say what I wanted to say, but I realized I didn't care about political correctness anymore. That's bullshit! I finally spat out. He looked at me with surprise on his face. I never swore at my parents, but I didn't let that stop me. You think you deserve to cheat because you were a shitty husband to another woman over 20 years ago? That's bullshit. Plain and simple. Andre, I'm still your father. No, Dad. It's your turn to listen to me, I said firmly. His mouth slammed shut. All my life, you and Mom have been feeding me all kinds of nonsense about the proper way to treat women. Well, you treated your mom right. No matter how you treated your first wife, you did the right thing with Mom. She had no right to cheat on you. And you sitting here letting her do it because of some damn karmic justice is a slap in the face to everything you taught me about being a man. That got him thinking. Things went quiet between us, but then I noticed he was looking at me with something in his eyes. It was respect. Not the general respect he gave me because he loved me, but the respect a man has for another man. He nodded with a slight smile on his face. He even laughed a little. You could feel the sadness in it, but it was still a laugh. It's not every day a son teaches his father. You mean besides on the basketball court, right? I've taken you to school plenty of times, man. I joked with a smirk to lighten the mood. Nah. It took him a few seconds, but eventually he laughed heartily. Old man? You call me an old man while you yourself are suffering from Alzheimer's disease. There's no other explanation for you having such a bad memory, he replied, patting me on the shoulder. The conversation turned playful, with each of us trying to prove our point about who belongs on the court. We sat like that for another 30 minutes, eating our food and having fun with each other, despite the gloomy elephant in the room. I knew my dad was making a brave face for me. I also knew that inside he was dying, and so was I. But we laughed at the pain, even if it was only for a moment. As we walked to our cars, my dad stopped me. "Hey, Andre, I just wanted to thank you. You're a man I'm proud to call my son." I nodded humbly in response to his praise. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." We stood like that for an awkward minute before I asked, "So, what are you going to do about Mom?" He just shook his head and exhaled noisily. "I don't know. I really don't. As long as I don't lose you, I'm okay with whatever happens." "You're never going to lose me, Dad. You don't have to worry about that. You have to do what's good for you." He held out his hand, and I squeezed it in a firm handshake. Then he pulled me to him for one last hug. "I love you, son. No matter what happens, don't ever forget that." "That's right, Dad. Same thing." 6 months later, I knocked on the door of my parents' house. I mean my mom's house. There was a time when I would have just used my key and walked in, but that time was gone. My mom and I hadn't gotten along since I told my dad about her and Charles. She felt insulted that I didn't come to her and at least try to talk to her before I went off the deep end. The rift got even bigger when my father filed for divorce. After that, she stopped talking to me altogether. She just became depressed and blamed me for her circumstances. I tried to get her to talk to me. I tried to build a bridge between us. She rejected all of my attempts. I think the only thing she wanted was an apology from me. She wanted an apology from me. How could it be any other way? She cheated and tore the family apart, and yet she's the one waiting for an apology. What the hell? As much as I value my relationship with her, there is no way I would apologize. If anything, she should have been the one to apologize to everyone. That's how we lived in this stalemate. After a month of outright rejection, I stopped trying altogether. When I gave up, a part of me died. After all, she was my mom. Despite everything, I still loved her. I was in pain too. Couldn't she see that? Tubby and I had deteriorated dramatically. We lived in the same house, but I was an empty shell to her. I guess some part of me was punishing her for the part she played in my parents' breakup. I could admit that. But a lot of it was simple mistrust. My attitude toward women in general had taken a sharp turn for the worse. After my mother's infidelity, her abandonment of me, and waiting to apologize for the consequences of her behavior, and my crumbling marriage, I had little appreciation for the opposite sex. They became deceitful, evil, manipulative to me. They were the enemy. I saw our society's double standard as an act of war. Every time I confronted them, they infuriated me. I even started a boycott of sorts. I stopped opening doors for women, stopped giving up my seat if I saw a woman standing, stopped complimenting them. Everything. Chivalry was dead to me. I saw it as a system of enslavement designed to turn men into will-less dogs. No one felt that more than Tabby. She tried to apologize for lying to me. She tried to make amends, but I wouldn't let her. I was stuck in my universe of anger and rage. Like me, she gave up trying to get closer when she was constantly faced with my abrupt rejection. She no longer greeted me when I came home. We no longer watched television together. Our once vibrant life went on life support. There was no laughter, no deep conversations other than about bills, no life. The only good thing about it was that my father was able to keep his business, which was one of his main concerns. Since he had been successful before he married my mom, and his lawyer was very good, he got it free and clear. However, he had to pay her alimony, and she got the house. But compared to him giving her half of his business, it was quite bearable. Today, my dad told me to go visit my mom. He said she would need me. The final paperwork came in today, and he wanted to make sure she was okay. It was one of those times I wished I was an only child. Why didn't I have a younger brother or sister to do this instead of me? It wasn't that I didn't want to see her. I was just tired of her rejecting me. How could she expect me to be her accomplice in lies and deceit, and even in front of her own father? I felt like I did the right thing. That's what they taught me, to stand up for what I believe is right, even when everyone else is against it. But then again, they taught me a lot of things they didn't believe in themselves. Why should it be any different? But I promised to check on her, and that led me to her house after months of not even passing by it. After knocking a third time and getting no answer, I considered going home. But a promise is a promise, so I used my key and opened the door. I was a little surprised that the locks hadn't been changed. I expected it to look different. This place had once been home to a family. My family. Now it was something else. Everything was the same as I remembered, but at the same time, nothing was the same. The only physical difference was the absence of all the family photos. However, that one missing component changed everything. It turned this house into nothing more than a beautiful tomb. I found Mom in the living room watching television. An unopened manila envelope lay on the coffee table in front of her. I didn't go in and sit down on the couch. I just stood in the doorway and called out, "Mom? It's me, Andre." She didn't acknowledge my presence. She just sat on the couch, ignoring me as if I was some ghost she couldn't see or hear. "Mom, I know you can hear me." Finally, she turned to look at me. There was still anger splashed in her eyes, but mostly they were filled with sadness. After a moment, she turned back to the TV again. "What do you want, Andre?" she asked in an indifferent voice. I I came to check on you, to make sure you're okay," I said, trying to contain my emotions. "I'm fine," she replied in her lifeless voice. "I'm fine" is a phrase that means something completely different when said by a woman in that tone of voice. It doesn't mean, "I'm fine." It actually means, "back off." I was almost ready to turn around and walk away, but I didn't. Months of being shut down came to the surface, and it all blended into a ball of, "I don't care." "You know what, Mom? You're a real bitch." That got her attention. She turned to me, wrinkling her nose like an enraged bull. "How dare you talk to me like that?" I didn't back down. "Oh, now you want to talk to me? Is that what I have to do to get you to acknowledge me?" She jumped up from the couch and rushed toward me. "I am your mother, boy. I brought you into this world, not the other way around. Don't you dare even think you can come into my house and talk to me like that." "Do you hear me?" She growled at me, pointing her finger at me repeatedly. I stood my ground. This was the first conversation we'd had in months, and I wasn't going to whine and let it stall. "If you're my mother, then act accordingly. I'm your son, and you treat me worse than a stranger on the street." Her eyes were still full of anger. "You're my son, but that didn't stop you from stabbing me in the back." "I stabbed you in the back? What about what you did to me?" "Done to you? Done to you? Grow up, Andre. That was between me and your father. It had nothing to do with you." "You ruined my family, Mom. On top of that, you stole the foundation of my marriage from me. That has everything to do with me." "Stop it, Andre." "No, Mom. Don't you realize what you've done to me? Everything you taught me was a lie. Everything. Remember you told me that if I treated a woman like a queen, she would treat me like a king. Remember?" For the first time in ages, she was silent. I took this opportunity to say what I had desperately wanted to say to her since this whole thing started. "When I was growing up, you always told me to look to my father as an example of how women should be treated. I based the very idea of a man's role in a relationship on that. According to you, you were supposed to treat Dad like the king of kings. But you went and entertained a man who treated you like garbage. What does that tell me about marriage? Huh?" To her credit, the tears began to drip. She didn't start coming up with some rationalistic nonsense to twist things around and victimize herself. She didn't start looking to me as a scapegoat for her situation. She just stood there and cried silently. Then she suddenly squeezed past me and ran upstairs. I stood there for a few minutes, listening for sounds that might tell me what she was doing. But the house was big, so I didn't catch anything. After a minute or two of silence, I went looking for her. I found her in the bedroom. She was lying face down. Her shoulders were shaking as she cried. Mommy! Go away, Andre, I heard her say. Mom, please, talk to me, I begged. She continued to cry. I stood in desperate silence and watched her cry. I wanted to comfort her, but at the same time, I wanted her to suffer. When I realized she wasn't going to let me in, I shook my head and turned to leave. At that moment, I heard her words. Don't go, she pleaded in a trembling voice, a barely audible whisper. It was so quiet, I didn't think I heard her correctly until she said, Please don't go. I walked over to the bed and sat down next to her prostrate body. As she sobbed, I gently stroked her back, trying to soothe her. She cried into her pillow for at least an hour. I stayed close to her, touching her to let her know I was there for her. Even when hunger clutched my stomach, I stayed. When she got up, we talked. Really talked. Why, Mom? Why? I finally asked the question that plagued me every day. She shook her head sadly. Because I never stopped loving Charles. He drew me in so much that I couldn't get rid of him, even after everything he did to me. But didn't you love your father? She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head sadly again. Yes and no. I loved your father. Loved him, believe it or not. But I was never in love with him. I didn't love him the way I loved Charles. I know you want to hear something else, but I must tell you the truth now. I believe I could have fallen completely in love with him if I had met him first, but I didn't. Then why did you marry him? She exhaled noisily and wiped away a new tear rolling down her face. Because of you. Huh? Henry loved you, Andre. From the moment he saw you, he loved you. You two became instantly attached to each other. Plus, he was good to me. We had been dating for a few months when I realized I couldn't love him the way he deserved. I almost broke up with him a few times. But every time I was ready to let him go, I saw the two of you together. I couldn't bring myself to break up with him. So you married him? She nodded sadly. When he popped the question, I couldn't say no. I just hoped I would eventually fall in love with him like I did with Charles. How long did you cheat on him, Mom? She sighed and lowered her eyes. I don't know, a few years. At least physically. And it wasn't permanent. It was a once-and-for-all kind of thing. While you were home, I was a good wife. I took care of my husband. I was faithful to him. I made love to him when he wanted and tried not to nag him too often. And then, shortly after you went to college, I saw Charles at the grocery store. It was like a cruel joke of fate. He was with another woman. They were walking down the aisle buying shells for tacos or something. He had his arm around her shoulders and was whispering something in her ear. When I heard her laughing loudly, I started to get jealous. She burst into sardonic laughter. Funny, isn't it? I was jealous of a man I hadn't seen in over 15 years. She paused, looking at the wall. I didn't add anything, even when she fell silent. This was her show. Her memories. I needed to know what happened, and I didn't want to stop her flow. When he saw me, we talked for a minute. It wasn't a big deal. After all, he was with another woman. But I could feel the spark between us. It went straight to my stomach and made the butterflies flutter. That's when I realized I still loved him. That selfish man. She paused again, tears streaming down her face again. But I still didn't say anything. I just waited for her to start telling me again. Then he started calling me. I don't even know how he got my phone number. But somehow he managed to, and he invited me to lunch. He said he wanted to apologize for the way he broke up with me. So I went to lunch with him. I didn't sleep with him that day, but it wasn't long before I crossed that line. Did you feel guilty? Yes, I did. All the time. The first time I couldn't even look at Henry after I did it. I was so ashamed I couldn't even be near him. After a few days, I got over it. I showered Henry with love and told Charles that he should leave me alone. I was a married woman, and he had to accept that I had withdrawn. And how did it all come back? She smiled slightly with nostalgia. Charles never knew how to take no for an answer. He pursued me and wore me down for months until I gave in again. That's just the way it went on for us. We would get into heated relationships. I would feel guilty and ask him to back off, and he would relentlessly pursue me until I gave in again. It became our thing. Was it worth it? I asked. Her face darkened. It was the worst mistake of my life, she said simply. I didn't know how I felt at that moment. Anger and disappointment were definitely present, but for some reason I also felt sorry for her. She had a long and lonely road ahead of her. Who knows, maybe karma would even come back to her like it did to Henry. She definitely deserved it, but the realization that she deserved it did nothing to soften my sympathy. After all was said and done, she was still my mother. No decent son can fail to sympathize with his mother when she suffers, whether she brought the trouble on herself or not. Did he ever ask about me? I asked. I know it was selfish, but it was another question that plagued me. I didn't even know why I cared. My father, Henry, was and still is a great father. I didn't need or want anyone else. But there was still a sense of rejection. To know that the man who created me had walked away so easily and never wanted anything to do with me left a hole that no amount of hatred could fill. And to find out that he was still seeking a relationship with my mom, or whatever it was, for the past few years was another slap in the face. He wanted her, but not me. It was painful. I wanted nothing to do with him, but I'd be lying if I said it would be nice if he at least acknowledged me. She looked at me sympathetically this time. A little bit, Dre, she replied, knowing that wasn't what I wanted to hear. He asked what was going on in your life when we first met, and I showed him pictures of you at the wedding. I told him about your wife and how well you were doing. But he didn't really want to see you. He was just making small talk. I couldn't fight the queasy feeling bubbling in the back of my stomach. I loved my mother, but I was disgusted by her at the same time. The thought of her jeopardizing her marriage for this man who had heartlessly rejected her only son made me furious all over again. The very fact that she had any feelings for this guy kept me on edge. I fought the urge to lash out at her again. We sat on her bed in silence for a few moments. Then she reached out and took my shoulder. Dre, I know you're mad at me. I know I disappointed you and probably messed with your head by giving you advice I didn't follow. I'm really sorry about that. What I did was selfish and hurtful, and I wish I could take it all back. I just nodded in agreement. I couldn't look at her, so my gaze fell to the bed. She took my chin and lifted my head so that I was looking at her. Then she looked sternly straight into my eyes. I know I'm the last person who should be giving you advice. I know that. But I feel I have to tell you this before you repeat the mistakes your parents made. What mistakes? With your wife. I burst into a sardonic laugh. You mean the one who lied to me to cover for you, right? Yes, she lied to you. She was wrong. But I'm the one who put her in that position. She found out about me and Charles by mistake. One day she came in just as Charles was leaving. You slept with him in Papa's bed? I asked incredulously, raising my voice considerably. She shook her head vigorously. No, no, son. He knew Henry was out of town and tried to make a surprise visit. I didn't let it get that far. He tried, but I didn't want to do it in the house. When I realized he was going to keep pushing his point, I gave the go-ahead and told him he had to leave. When he left, we kissed. That's when Tabby saw us. I begged her not to tell you. I made her promise. She said she'd keep my secret, but she didn't like it. She convinced me to think about what I was doing and get it over with. You let him into Dad's house anyway. You may not have slept with him, but it was still disrespectful. I know. Like I said, if I could have changed anything, I would have, she said in an apologetic tone. I shook off my disappointment in my mom and asked, So how did Tabby go from not thrilled about it to covering for you? I broke up with Charles after Tabby caught us. It was a wake-up call. I stayed away from him for a while. During that time, Tabby and I grew close. That's when she really became my daughter. I guess a big part of me was grateful for her, and that made me love her even more. But by that weekend when you and your dad went out of town, Charles and I had rekindled our relationship. I was supposed to spend the weekend with Tabby. She and I were going to get manicures and pedicures and have a whole girls' weekend away. But then Charles called and said he had tickets to a new ballet going on in town. I tried to cancel with Tabby, but she was disappointed and kept asking why. She said she was looking forward to a girls' night out. Since she kept insisting, I had to be honest with her and tell her the truth. I never asked her to lie to you, but I think she did it because you knew she had to be with me. She didn't want you to ask her why it was canceled. That still doesn't absolve her of blame, I said. For some odd reason, I also wondered what kind of man takes a woman to the ballet on Super Bowl Sunday. Someone who wants to get laid, that's who. I know, Dre. But don't you think she's suffered enough already? Don't you think she has regrets? How much longer does she have to live in purgatory? I jumped up from the bed. It's not about making her suffer. I don't trust her. She lied to me to protect you. Your little adulterous liaisons were more precious to her than me. Her promise to you trumped her oath to me. Why should I trust her? She nodded thoughtfully. So, what are you going to do? Why haven't you divorced her yet? If you can't trust her, you should get rid of her and move on with your life. That stopped me dead in my tracks. No matter what, I had never seriously considered leaving Tabby. What Mom said next sent an arrow straight to my heart. I say this because I guarantee you, if you keep treating her like this, she'll leave you. Right now, she regrets what she did. She desperately wants to repair your relationship. But the longer you keep pushing her away, the less pain there will be. And the less pain, the easier it will be for her without you. You don't want to wake up the day she stops crying for you. Then she'll realize she's better off alone than miserable with you. Trust me, son. She will leave you that day, and there will be no turning back. As I drove home, I thought about what Mom had said. Yes, I was angry with Tabby. I didn't trust her, even though I knew deep down she hadn't cheated on me. But she was covering for a cheater, and it was really hard for me to understand that. But I also knew that I definitely didn't want to destroy my marriage. Underneath all that anger, I loved her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to trust her. I couldn't bring myself to let go of the fact that she was capable of keeping secrets that could hurt me. When you know a person is capable of something, it's hard to expect anything less from them if the situation calls for it. Upon reaching home, I sat by the roadside for about 20 minutes. I wasn't ready to go inside yet. I couldn't look into Tabby's eyes. I was standing on the edge of a precipice again. If you think about it, that's what love and trust is. It's like jumping off a cliff. You have to trust that there's something down there to stop you falling. Otherwise, all you will have to do is watch in despair as you fall toward an inevitable end filled with pain and death. I wanted to jump. I really wanted to. But I couldn't. I was no longer 100% sure there was anything down there to protect me. Out of nowhere, my father's voice came to me. Something like a furtive memory of one of the many lessons he had taught me. Son, when a man is faced with a seemingly impossible task, he does one of two things. He either runs away from it or he tries to figure out how to do it. The answer doesn't always come to him right away. Sometimes the only thing he can do is to take the first step and fight until the answer comes on its own. If he doesn't fight, he can never win. The only question I had to answer was this. Was my marriage worth fighting for? Yes, it was. I loved Tabby. Unlike my parents' marriage, Tabby and I loved each other. We chose each other without conditions or hidden agendas. So I took a deep breath, put one foot in front of the other, and stepped off the ledge. When I entered my house, she was sitting on the couch reading a book. She looked up to greet me and then continued reading. Instead of leaving to go to another room like I had done before, I walked in and sat down next to her. She looked up at me again, this time with surprise on her face. Tabby, we need to talk. Instantly, she tensed up and her eyes filled with tears. It puzzled me, but I overpowered myself and continued talking. I want us to go to counseling. We've been in a cold war for too long, and we need to do something before we end up like my parents. She exhaled intermittently and sucked in a large amount of air. You mean you're not? Oh my God, Andre. I thought. With those words, she fell into my arms and wrapped her arms around me. I could feel her shaking as she cried on my shoulder. And suddenly the reason for her strange reaction became clear. Did you think I was going to leave you? No, Tabby. No. That made her cry even harder. Please, Dre, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have lied to you. I stroked her back. I know. But we have a lot more to overcome than lying. I have to trust you to make things work for us, but right now I don't. And I want to. I really want to. But I can't. It's not just the lies. It's also about why you did it. She let go of me and stepped back to look at me. I don't understand. You lied to me to help my mother deceive you. I think that says several things. First, you have no problem with cheating, as long as it's done by a woman. You told me many times that if I ever cheated on you, you'd cut my balls off. And yet you didn't mind my mother cheating on my father. Secondly, it shows that you have no respect for me or my feelings. You cared more about helping my mother cover her tracks than you did about how it would affect me. Those are two big hurdles to overcome. She nodded sadly. I understand. I didn't do it consciously, but I understand how you might think that. But I would never, ever cheat on you. No matter what you think of me, it's important to me that you know that. I thought about it for a moment. I didn't like what she had done. More than that, I hated it. But eventually, I admitted to myself that it must be hard for her. She was in a difficult situation. Yes, she should have told me, but I realized it wasn't easy. And I didn't really think she cheated. I know I told her that it makes sense that only someone who approves of cheating would cover for the cheater, but I also realized that maybe someone who doesn't know how to handle a difficult situation and is afraid of being the catalyst for a family breakdown might do what she did. Well, we'll talk about that in counseling. Like I said, we still have a lot to work through, but I'm willing to work on it if you're willing. She gave me another hug. I'm so willing to work on this, baby. I love you so much, Andre. You're the best man I know. Epilogue. 1 year later. I tried to hold back. I really tried. But I couldn't. Anger swept over me. He was there, 20 feet away from me, laughing, smiling, teasing me with every breath he took. Why had he managed to get away unscathed? After causing so much pain, why should he get a free pass from karma? I know my father would want me to leave. I know he would tell me to just forget about it. I could practically hear his voice sounding like a mantra in my head. But I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't. So I walked over to him. I thought I did it pretty calmly, but some who witnessed it said I looked like I was eager for a fight. Others said they didn't see anything like that. I just wanted to scare him a little bit. You know, make him feel the need to look over his shoulder at night. What I didn't expect was for him to say something that would make me snap at him and turn into the Hulk. Hey, I know you. You're my son, aren't you? I don't remember hitting him the first time. I don't even remember the second time. I only remember 3 guys pulling him off me while he groaned on the floor. I was hoping the judge would be lenient on me. I'd never been in trouble with the law before. I was a hard worker. I was a married man with a baby on the way. Yes, Tabby was pregnant. I thought I would get off with a slap on the wrist. After all, I was only guilty of taking out the trash. But I got lucky. For one thing, it looks like my mom and dad finally did something together. They visited Charles in the hospital. Dad asked my mom to get him coffee, and when she was gone, talked to Charles. Dad suggested that he drop the charges against me. He told him that he had turned the other cheek when Charles entertained his wife, but he couldn't do that when his son was on the line. His father then leaned down so his mouth was next to Charles's ear and whispered something that made Charles's eyes get big and a look of fear appear on his face. When his mother returned with the coffee, his father patted Charles on the chest as if they were two buddies. But there was something very unfriendly in his eyes. They were stone cold, almost evil. Fortunately, Charles decided not to press charges against me. He said he could not do that to his own son. His favor knew no bounds. But the DA decided to press charges anyway, even without his cooperation. It didn't go very smoothly, though. Different witness accounts made it impossible to prove that it wasn't just a fight between two men. In the end, the case wasn't convincing enough to pursue. He barely had time to put away the real criminals, and getting involved in a father-son showdown wasn't worth it. Sometimes karma works both ways. My parents never got back together, but they put most of the pain behind them. My dad stopped hating my mom after a while, and my mom was able to forgive herself. They were even able to be in the same room by the time my granddaughter came along. Neither of them ever remarried. I think they were both very tired of the relationship. They each married the other to right past wrongs, and now they didn't feel the need to go down that path again. Tabby and I went to counseling. We found a wonderful woman named Bethany Carter, and she helped us a lot. It took me a while to overcome the distrust I had for Tabby. I also had to fight the urge to redirect the anger and frustration I was feeling towards my mom onto her. As hard as it was, we never stopped fighting for our marriage. There were good days and bad days. After a while, the bad days became fewer. We realized that everything we were going through led to better communication between us. It turns out that when you jump off a figurative cliff, things change. Some things are destroyed and others are just damaged. However, those things that are truly indestructible survive the fall. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video. My name is Andrew Baker. My friends call me AB, but never Andy. There's always some obnoxious drunk, some jerk who doesn't know me and wants to be more familiar than he deserves, and he'll always call me Andy. So Andy, what do you do for a living? I tell him. I created a neat little device that police officers can just point at you from 40 feet away and determine if you're drunk. They've started attaching them to radar guns all over the city. That usually stops them. Although, in case you haven't already guessed, no such device actually exists. I guess you can tell I don't tolerate fools very well. Fool me and it gets worse. I'm not a complicated person. In fact, I love the simple life. I like my job. I am an engineer at a large national company with many branches all over the country. I have friends. I don't drink much, but I can have a beer once in a while. Truth be told, I prefer nachos, but that's my struggle. If I get out of control, I'll gain weight. I need to keep this beast in check, so I struggle and stay in reasonable shape for someone my age. I used to sail every chance I got, but a wife and 2 young daughters take up a lot of a person's time, and I soon sold the boat. This is just one of life's little sacrifices I made many years ago, and I did it gladly so that I could have time to spend with those I care about. I have been happily married to Karen, a high school teacher, for 25 years. Our 2 girls are in college. Claire attends Brown in Rhode Island, and her younger sister Denise attends Boston University. I doubt I could afford those schools, but the girls are serious students and have received some exceptional scholarships. We live in North Carolina, in a neighborhood called the Research Triangle. It's built around some very good universities in the Raleigh area, and the best high-tech firms are all around. It's a great place to live and work. I would tell you about the Carolina Barbecue restaurant, but I just get hungry just thinking about it. I was a little disappointed when the girls decided to go north for college, but I think they needed to spread their wings a little bit, and in the long run, that's a good thing. The girls are great. They are smart, funny, outgoing girls with a strong sense of right and wrong. I worry every day about their safety, but I don't worry about their choices. Seeing them grow up and take their first steps toward independence meant that my wife and I would finally have time to ourselves again. I've been looking forward to these days for a long time. When both girls left for college, I dreamed of coming home every night to a loving wife who would give me her attention and I hers, and life would go on one joyous day after another. We could be like newlyweds again. We would go out to dinner, see plays, go to the movies, and finally be reunited the way I always wanted to be. But it didn't quite work out that way. Truth be told, in the first year of our empty nest, Karen began to change. Her interests were drifting away from me, or so it seemed. It happened gradually, but over time it became noticeable. I wrote it off as her having a chance to blossom when the girls separated, but over time I realized that I was observing a fundamental change in her values and priorities. Karen teaches English with an emphasis on creative writing. To be honest, and I hope rightly so, she is a frustrated writer. As a young mother and teacher, she never had time to write the way she wanted to. Karen wrote all summer and whenever she could spare an hour or two, but nothing much came out of it. She regularly submitted essays and short stories to literary magazines, accumulating only a vast collection of rejection letters, and the major work never came. To be honest, I love reading what my wife writes. But as a writer, she has never gotten beyond formulaic and often melodramatic stories. She has a romantic notion of what a writer should be, and I suspect, not that I've ever told her this, that she's more attracted to the idea of being a writer than to writing itself. No matter. If she's happy, I'm happy. For most of our marriage, Karen has been a member of a writers' group of one sort or another. These are people who get together to help each other, criticize, suggest, and discuss their work to make each other better. Some of the groups seemed really productive to me, while others seemed more like mutual admiration societies. Her last group, which was her current group when things fell apart, had both. They took turns getting together at each other's houses, and when they were here, I tried not to draw attention to myself. I tried to participate once, but it drew disapproving looks from Karen and some of the others, and I gave up trying. Karen's current writing group has about 10 people in it, and there are both men and women among them. Some of them I like. Others I'd go my whole life without. Half of them are unassuming, and half of them make a very definite impression when you meet them. Reggie, a woman, really enjoys writing stories and biographies. She does real research and writes books that have a strong academic focus, but still try to keep the reader engrossed. I've read them all and really enjoyed them. That's what I told her. Betty loves to write fantasy. I don't think she imagines herself to be the next J.K. Rowling. She's more like a talking unicorn, but she's pleasant and seems to write mostly for her own enjoyment. Who can deny that? Bill is a know-it-all. A little of that can drag on, but in all other respects he seems okay. And then there's Frank. The first time I met him, alarm bells went off in my head, and they haven't stopped since. When I was introduced to Frank, and I was definitely given to understand that I was being introduced to him, and not the other way around, he said, "So Andy, what do you do?" I looked at my wife, who pursed her lips and shook her head, and simply said, "Engineer, Frank." What was that? A smile or a smirk? I've already told you that I've given up trying to participate in their band, but I try to be out of sight and out of mind, but not out of sound when they come in. I will work quietly in the next room or on the back porch with the window open until they forget I'm there. I've noticed from the beginning that when Frank interacts with Karen, it's like they have their own personal banter. Sometimes he inflates her ego, and other times he seems to know her thoughts with a kind of intimacy that doesn't bother me one bit. He refers to past conversations, and I get the impression that the rest of the group doesn't remember anything about them. It just seems that way to me, but I don't like it, and I've mentioned it to her. She just brushed off my concerns, and I know it's best not to push her. I made sure she knows how I feel about it. The rest is up to her. The group has its own pattern of meetings. After a work session, the group sits around a table, has some wine, and relaxes. That's when I find out that some of them are just faking it. It was the middle of the spring semester, early March, when the conversation turned to the lifestyle of real writers. Oh, all the great writers were alcoholics. Really. They write in the morning and drink in the afternoon and evening. It relaxes the brain for new ideas, and then in the mornings their creative juices flow and they write. Actually, all the really great writers had love affairs. That was their real inspiration. Frank said that. Thank you, Frank. I got your number, asshole. At that moment, Karen tied a knot in my stomach. Oh, I know. It's in the passion and excitement of the unknown, the thrill of hiding it all from other people's eyes, that the real inspiration lies. Some of them laughed and some of them didn't, so I told myself it was just a joke, but I kept my eyes on them the rest of the evening. Maybe we should all have a night of fun sometime, and then we'll write the great American novel. That was Bill. I couldn't tell if he was joking or not. Character flaws are not the basis of great writing. Humanity, compassion, and the challenge of the unknown are what great stories are built on. I told you I liked Betty. Great stories are about facing hardship, striving for greatness against the odds, and making the world a better place than it used to be. Well, maybe if you cast the right spell, we'll save ourselves all that trouble. It was asshole Frank again. To his shame, some of the group seemed to find it amusing. I doubt Betty did, and I suspect Reggie did too. Their conversation continued about this writer's drinking habits and that writer's mistresses, and I continued to listen without giving a hand. Then I caught on to an interesting topic. Is anyone else applying for the Illinois Writers' Workshop this summer? It was Frank again. Oh, I've already applied. I hope I get accepted. 6 weeks to just write and socialize with writers. This could be a real change for me. That was Karen, and it was the first I'd heard of it. Frank picked up on it right away. I'm sure they'll let you in. You've gotten a lot better at writing in the last year. I know you'll be accepted. I've applied too, but I'm not sure I'll be accepted. My bullshit meter was picked up. Really, Frank, since when have you been so humble? I didn't like what I was hearing, but at that moment I still loved and trusted my wife. When you've been married as long as we have, trust becomes fundamental. You don't ask yourself, maybe she's misbehaving? That thought doesn't cross your mind. Marriage is a team, and your partner is your better half. She proves her loyalty year after year, and all you hope for is that she gets the success and fulfillment she deserves. At least that's what you think. And then it all comes crashing down when you find out that your trust has been betrayed. As time passed, I allowed myself to forget that night's conversation. Like I said, I trusted my wife. Some young guys will never realize this, but after more than 2 decades of marriage, trust is as much a way of life as a choice. It was late April, and I was working in the garden, deciding I had had enough for the day and headed into the house. As I reached for the kitchen door, I heard my wife on the phone saying, I can't wait. 6 whole weeks with no responsibilities, no commitments, and no one waiting for me to come home. That last phrase was memorable. I froze and listened. I know. This is going to be the most leisurely 6 weeks of my life. I owe it to myself. And so do you. Nothing about this pleased me. I opened the door and stepped into the kitchen. Karen was flabbergasted. Well, I have to go. AB is already here and I need to start dinner. She quickly hung up the phone. Who was that? Oh, that was Reggie. We were talking about school ending soon. Like hell it is, I thought. I wanted to ask her about the specific things she'd said, especially that no one expects me to come home, but I felt like the truth wouldn't be enough today. My mood turned somber, but I did my best to hide it. Later, after dinner, the second shoe dropped. AB, there's no way you'll ever guess what great news I got today. Remember that writer's workshop in Illinois I applied for? No. Oh, of course you remember. You never listened to me. Truth be told, I was well aware of that workshop, but only because I had overheard her talking about it that night over a month ago. No, I don't think you ever told me about it. Yes, I did. I applied for a 6-week writing workshop. It runs from mid-June through the end of July at the University of Illinois. Professors lecture there, invite great writers to workshops and discussion groups, and then we write. It's a great opportunity, and I've been accepted into the program. That sounds great, honey. I'm sure we can afford it. Maybe I can carve out some time and join you. I'd love to hear some of these writers speak. That remark seemed to take her by surprise. Oh, well, we can try. It would be a very intense 6 weeks, and I wouldn't have much time to spend with you. My delusion meter went off again. Well, you know I'm unpretentious, and maybe I could be the guy who brings coffee for the group. She smiled a nervous, confused smile. That would be wonderful, dear. We'll see what happens. I'd encountered this kind of deflection before, and I knew what it meant. She was going to make sure I never went to Illinois to join her. I have a feeling you'd rather I didn't go with you. Oh no, that's not it. I'm just afraid you'll be bored. You love your computers and schematics, and here it's just a bunch of writers musing about great ideas. Bitch. I didn't say it out loud, but mentally I shouted it so the neighbors could hear. I'm really not stupid, honey. Oh, that's not what I meant. It's just that your mind likes to work on details, while writers struggle with the big questions of life. Double bitch. But I didn't say it out loud. I knew when someone was trying to marginalize me. I'm sure you'll succeed. Later that night, after Karen went to bed, I got on the internet to look at our phone records. @and allows you to do that. All incoming and outgoing calls are logged along with text messages. I checked the call log, and it turns out that the call I interrupted was not from Reggie, or if it was from Frank's phone. It's amazing how quickly trust can break down after 25 years of marriage when you catch your wife in a lie and find her plotting to exclude you. Weeks went by and all she talked about was the seminar. I tried several times to engage her in the idea that I might go with her or visit her at some point, but she rejected the idea each time. Then she went from reasoning to manipulation. AB, I have the most wonderful news. I got you 2 tickets to a fishing camp in northern Canada at the end of June. You can take Jake and the 2 of you can fish for those huge fish you're always talking about. It costs a fortune, but I wanted to thank you for your insight about the writer's workshop and felt guilty that you wouldn't enjoy it. So I want you to go and have fun. And then we can compare notes when I get home. I smelled a rat. Thank you, sweetie. That was very thoughtful of you. Truth be told, I'd have more fun with you. AB, we've been over this. It just doesn't make sense. I'll be working all the time and I'll feel guilty for ignoring you so much. I stared at her face and eyes for a minute, trying to figure out what I was seeing there. Was it condescension? Thanks, honey. It looks like it's going to be fun in Canada. I said it without much enthusiasm. Options were running through my head. An unexpected visit to Illinois was at the top of the list. Well, you could at least smile when you say that. Those tickets cost a lot of money and I want you to be happy. Okay, sounds like fun. I went down to the basement to fiddle around for the rest of the evening. Our house is old, and it has one of those floor grates in the hallway. It allows hot air to come up from the furnace room and was originally used to heat the first floor. When we first moved in, I tried not to step on it unless I wanted to, but after a while I got used to it and forgot it was there. The phone is in the hallway too. I was cowering quietly in the basement and contemplating my next steps when I heard Karen calling. Yes, I gave him the tickets. He's still resisting. I don't know. I keep telling him he won't like it. No, I can't directly tell him to stay home. I know, and I want that too. But at the end of the day, I want to stay married. I just want him to give me some space to enjoy myself for a few weeks. I deserve that. Yeah, I want to spend those weeks with you too. Okay, just leave it alone for a while. I think he'll come to his senses. Okay, baby, I miss you too. Write something nice for me tonight. With those words, she hung up the phone. My heart raced in my throat. I'm not stupid. I recognize cheating when I hear it. Either Karen was having an affair or she was planning one. Anything less, and she'd have a long time to explain herself. It took me 20 minutes to gather my thoughts, but I knew at this point I needed to become the liar I'd always despised. At the very least, I needed to keep my cards to myself until I figured out what I was going to do. I called upstairs and in my most loving voice said, Karen, I'm going over to Jake's house to tell him the good news. Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Have fun. And with those words, I walked out the basement door. I needed to stay away, and Jake was just an excuse. But after thinking about it, I realized that I needed someone to talk to, and Jake had been my best friend since we were in high school. You got me! Jake was never stingy with words. No way, I don't believe it. She would never cheat on you, AV. Well, she certainly tries her best to keep me out of that workshop, and she calls someone baby, and it sure isn't me. We just sat there in silence. That's a big part of what a guy needs from another guy, just to sit next to each other and share the pain. You have to talk to her about it, AB. You can't spend the next 2 months thinking the worst and not know anything. And what's she going to tell me? How much do you want to bet that tonight when I check the phone recording? It wasn't Frank she was talking to, it wasn't Frank she was calling baby, and it wasn't Frank she was scheming with? I'm sorry, I'm not taking that bet. What are you going to do? I'm going to sit down and talk it over. That's what you do after 25 years. I'm going to tell her how much I love her, tell her I'm hurt that she doesn't want me to go with her, and ask her head on what she has planned that she doesn't want me around. Do you think she'll tell the truth? No. But I'll tell her the truth, and part of it won't be what she wants to hear. She'll know I love her. She'll know that cheating on me will cause us to break up. And then she'll try to convince me that it's all in my head and I should go fishing. I paused for a moment. By the way, I have 2 tickets to a fishing camp in northern Canada at the end of June, and one of them is for you. Nice. Jake caught himself thinking. I mean, I'm here for you, buddy. I had to laugh. I'd never doubted his loyalty. We sat around for the next 3 hours, talking and drinking a little bit at a time, and then I headed home. After dinner, I asked Karen to sit with me in the living room and told her everything that was on my mind. Well, I told her almost everything. But I still had a few secrets left. Honey, I'm very concerned. I don't think you've been completely honest with me about the writer's workshop. I overheard you talking to a group of writers back in March, but you never told me about it until you started planning the trip. I even heard you talk about how all great writers have novels, and I admit I didn't think it was very funny. You talked about your trip with Frank, but when I ask about it, you lie to me and say it was someone else. You know how I feel about that snake. And when you said you were accepted, you seemed to purposely push me away and didn't want me to join you. I don't need to be there, but I wanted to join you on this great adventure. Then instead of considering taking me along, you oblige me to be elsewhere so I have no choice. You never discussed the idea with me. You just obligated me. It sounds like you're trying to guarantee that I won't be in your way while you're in Illinois. I don't think you've been completely truthful with me, and I'm beginning to doubt that you've been completely faithful. AB, I've never treated you that way, and I would never cheat on you. What is wrong with you? You are my husband, and I just want you to enjoy yourself. It hurts me that you feel that way about me. I can't help how I feel and what makes me think that way. You know that I love you. I've loved you since we met, but I could never get over the betrayal. Is this what you have planned, Karen? Is this writing workshop your vacation from marriage? And that was it. There was no more discussion or love talk. She broke into a screaming fit and spent the rest of the night either screaming or staring at me in silence. For the entire next week, she was silent. She went on the offensive, hollering at me, punishing me until I backed off. It wasn't helping. More than that, it convinced me that I was right. However, I wasn't making any progress, so in the end, I let her think she had won. If she was going to cheat, there was nothing I could do to stop her. In fact, that damn phone call I overheard said that she had already done it. I ended up thanking her for the trip to Canada, but my mood darkened and didn't lift again until it was over. Once she got her way, she quickly shifted gears and started playing loving wife to reinforce my desired behavior. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and it only heightened my suspicions. I know what manipulation is when I fall victim to it. What do you do when you know your wife is keeping secrets and playing dumb with you? What do you do when you lose trust in a woman you've trusted half your life? Hire a private investigator, which is what I did. The writer's workshop in Illinois was nearly 500 miles away, and I didn't know a soul there. So I asked a coworker who he had resorted to when he caught his wife cheating. I used his recommendation, and he recommended someone in Illinois, and I contacted him. The wonderful thing about the writer's workshop was that it was held on the campus of a state university. Private investigator operatives couldn't get into the program, though they could walk by the rooms all they wanted. But the workshop participants ate in the dining halls on campus, went to local bars, and lived in a large dormitory with other students. So no one noticed the odd student hanging around with nothing to do. Some of these students would work for me, and they would have high-tech gadgets. The school year was coming to an end. Our girls decided to stay at their universities for the summer to work in research labs with professors in their specialty. This meant that we would be left as empty nesters, and I had my work cut out for me. I took her out to dinner, cooked at home, and even took her to plays. She loved it all, and I was starting to think I was winning. But whenever I told her I loved her, she would respond with a dismissive, "I know." The pieces began to fall into place. She hadn't stopped loving me. She just took me for granted. I was known. I was safe. I was her security. She was sure she could go away, get a thrill, take a vacation from her marriage, and I would be here whenever she wanted. As a result, all my plans fell into place. The day she left, I decided I couldn't leave anything unsaid. We were standing at the door when her shuttle pulled up to the airport. I hugged her, told her I loved her, and said, "Please don't do anything that will ruin us." She threw me an angry look and said, "I'm tired of you not trusting me. When I get back, we're going to have a long conversation about this." She then gave me a quick peck on the cheek, picked up her bags, turned and walked to the shuttle. She left without even looking back at me. At that moment, I was sure my marriage was over. 25 years, 2 grown daughters, and my marriage ended with a whimper rather than an explosion. The private investigator did his job well. He told me they made it look easy. No one tried to cover up their behavior because no one knew them there. Karen must have taken the rings off on the airplane because when she got to the workshop, they weren't on her finger. She told everyone that she had recently gotten divorced, and my wife and Frank were immediately inseparable. They kissed, held hands, and snuggled up to each other like two high school seniors having their first crush. My private investigator managed to hide a small video camera in the hallway of the dorm they lived in. Karen and Frank were assigned a room each, but they only used one. Sometimes they used hers, sometimes his, but they always slept together. I knew what went on in these shared dorm rooms, but my private investigator and his team were very meticulous and left me in no doubt. One evening, before dark, my wife and Frank retired early. Two operatives, who looked like ordinary college students, sat down on the hallway floor with their backs to the wall and silently slid a miniature fisheye camera on a thin stalk under the door. They made a 20-minute videotape. I was done with that marriage. Everything else the team caught was just icing on the cake. My private investigator continued to update me regularly, but after that first week, her fate was sealed and my mind was made up. From the first days of her seminar, I used my time to carry out my plan. I became a ghost in the wind. I was disappearing or getting as close to it as I could. When she returned, I would be gone. There would be no going back, no lies, no threats, no long conversations, no explanations, no excuses, no fixes. There will only be a divorce. My marriage is over. Love doesn't die quickly, but what is love without trust? A wife who cheats has no future. Some will say my decision was weak. They will say she deserves physical punishment, total humiliation, and poverty. After all, the law would not allow me to do any of those things, and I was not going to ruin the rest of my life by trying to take revenge in this way on a cheating wife and her lover. My revenge would mean taking away the one thing she had always counted on, the one constant that had always been there to support her, to comfort her, to cheer her on and encourage her. I was taking myself away. Frank wasn't a catch. He could never support her. Where would a 50-year-old divorced mother look for love and emotional support? I didn't care. She would no longer be my problem. Every few days, my private investigator sent me more photos, more videos, and more facts of betrayal by someone who had promised me he would leave everyone else behind. The reports were hard to read. The photos and videos were even harder to watch. But the most painful part was listening to the audio files in which they talked about me. He texts me all the time about the big fish he's catching and how great it is out there. He thanks me almost every day. She laughed when she said this. That dumbass has no idea. Frank laughed. Well, better let him be. Treat him like a mushroom and he'll stop annoying you. Now he can have some fun. When I get home, I'm going to sick the whole force on that weirdo. How dare he accuse me of deceit? But you're taking a little vacation from your marriage, aren't you, Beauty? Or is it a different woman in my bed every night? She giggled. She actually giggled. What a bitch. He may be right, but that doesn't mean I intend to put up with it. I'm a writer, damn it, and he's holding me back with his schematics and computer codes, his milli and micro. What does he know about big ideas? At that moment, I began to truly hate the bitch. 25 years of building a life together, raising 2 kids, supporting each other. And hear this. What happened to my wife? Where did she go? That woman wasn't the woman I married. She was some stranger who took on my wife's appearance. She was some vile alien with no heart, no soul. Where was her love? Where was her compassion? Where the hell was her decency? Did she not remember the years we'd lived together and the life we'd created together? Did none of that really matter? No, obviously none of it mattered. She wanted her affair, and she was going to get it at any cost. After all, she was living the life of a writer, and she was due her greatness. There wasn't much I could do about it now, but I was determined that when it was over, she would have only her affair. I contemplated every conceivable form of revenge, up to and including public humiliation. I knew that none of those forms would bring me satisfaction as long as my life was tied to her life. There was only one option left, and I began the process of turning from human to ghost. I sat down with my boss and told him everything. He was very understanding. He had gone through something similar himself a few years earlier and quickly got me transferred to the company's office in Portland, Maine. I liked the idea. I knew the people in that office. They were professional, capable, and I liked them. I liked the city and the state. I called the movers and arranged to ship half of the furniture and all of my personal belongings north. I repaired the car and got it ready for the trip. Then I sat down at the table with my attorney and started preparing the paperwork. Karen had her own insurance and retirement account, so I took her name out of all of mine and listed my daughters as beneficiaries. I signed a quitclaim deed so she could have the house, but in exchange there would be no alimony. She will get her car, but will have to buy her own insurance. I saved the bank accounts for the last few days and the cards for the end. There was no need to tip me. From that point on, all I could do was reinforce my thoughts. What do I mean? I tried calling her to ask how the seminar was going and to tell her I loved her. I thought hearing her lie would help remind me that I was doing the right thing. She didn't let me down. She was full of enthusiasm, confessed her love, and ran off to dinner, all in less than 2 minutes. My PI later told me that Frank had been sitting next to her the whole time, and they were exchanging smiles, rolling their eyes, and generally disparaging comments about me. That helped a lot. It was all a joke to her, and I had no doubt that I was doing the right thing. From that point on, I sent her text messages instead of phone calls. I didn't believe I could keep my composure over the phone. I was telling her how the fish were biting, but what I was really doing was sending Jake and his beautiful wife on a trip. They loved it. Jake had a successful marriage. Before I left, I stopped by to say goodbye to both of them, and they promised to come visit me. As her 6 weeks came to an end, I completed the last of my assignments. A realtor friend gave me a for sale sign to hang in the front yard. I couldn't actually sell the house without her permission, and I had already deeded it to her. But she didn't know that. When she came home, this was the first thing she saw. I changed the locks on the house to make her feel like she didn't live there anymore, printed out some photos from her trip, including the most explicit footage from that video shot under Frank's door, and made a copy of the private investigator's report. I left it all on the dining room table so she'd know she was caught. The movers had already taken most of what I wanted and left it in storage until I was ready. I only took with me 2 suitcases, a briefcase, my laptop, and my guitar. The guitar had to be with me. I couldn't trust someone else with such an expensive item. I planned to leave the next morning until she returned by late afternoon. That way I would be gone by the time she arrived. But the night before, I had a last-minute change of heart. I wanted the pain to start now, when all she had to do was wait and worry until she got home. I enclosed 3 pictures of her and Frank with the words, "I'm divorcing you, I'm divorcing you, I'm divorcing you," and sent them to my soon-to-be ex-wife. I chose the one where they were almost copulating on the dance floor. You could see she wasn't wearing a wedding or engagement ring. The second one showed them walking hand in hand to his dorm room. The third one I took from the dorm room video where her face was clearly visible. I figured she'd see them, and maybe it would ruin her last romantic night with good old Frankie while they ran around looking for the cameras they'd already put away. I then turned off the phone. With the announcement made, I carried the last suitcase to the car and carefully stowed the guitar in the passenger seat. After looking around the house one last time, I picked up my phone, took a quick picture, and got behind the wheel. You probably thought I was driving one of those big diesel F-250 pickup trucks with all the extras. You think I started the engine, and the dishes rang in my neighbor's house. Weren't you listening? I'm an engineer. I like technology. I'd drive a Tesla if I got paid more, so I drive a hybrid. I hit the start button, the dials came to life, and I heard, nothing. It's a hybrid. I released the parking brake, put it in gear, and drove away from my house one last time so quietly that no neighbor would know I was gone. I was a ghost on the wind, moving silently through the world, leaving betrayal behind me. Leaving the house that had been our home for so many years, the home where we raised our daughters, was simultaneously the most painful, the most uncertain, and the most liberating experience of my life. From a practical standpoint, my wife died. I didn't know when or why, but she was dead to me as surely as if I had pulled the trigger myself. The woman who remained, who looked like my wife, was not someone I knew or wanted to know again. I was starting life anew with an unknown future. I was experiencing a profound sense of loss, and at the same time it was strangely liberating. The burden of lies, betrayal, and humiliation was lifted from my shoulders, if only temporarily. The only price I had paid was that half of my life was now lost to me. It was getting late, but I was worked up, so I calmly drove 100 miles down the highway in the company of only my thoughts until I found a hotel for the night. That's how I found myself over the Virginia border. I decided that after dropping the bomb on Karen, There was no reason for me to watch the results in real time, so I turned off my phone. I would find out later if my message had made any difference to her. Either way, I was leaving my old life behind, and her reaction wasn't worth the bother. I got a room, grabbed a small bag and guitar from the car, and fell asleep surprisingly quickly. I slept better that night than I had in months. When I got up, I took a long shower and went in search of a good locally produced breakfast. I wasn't looking for any mains. I wanted a real diner. I needed something real. I found it and got what will likely be my last serving of grits for a very long time. That grits got me thinking, and I began to rethink my trip to Maine. It was the first day of my revival, and I had a long drive ahead of me. I could have rushed to Maine, running away from all my problems, but I had 2 weeks before I had to go to work. Why rush? I needed time to calm down, come to terms with her betrayal, and put the past behind me. I decided to drive leisurely, enjoying the countryside as I traveled north and exploring each state and its people as I passed. It was a week of transitioning from my old life to my new one. I was going to indulge my taste buds and other senses to cleanse myself of all that was ugly and wrong in my old life and prepare for a new beginning. Virginia was the first day of my new life, and that meant I set out in search of Smithfield ham. I turned east and headed toward Williamsburg. Taking a few sensible steps that took me into the backcountry of southern Virginia, I managed to drive straight through Smithfield, where I found a lunch steeped in regional tradition and history before taking the car ferry across the James. At this time of year, the James is quiet and peaceful, not a breath of wind or ripple on the surface. Standing at the rail of the ferry and looking out over the river, I began to hum, "The End of the Earth," softly. Under the early morning moon, the road runs along the James. Something is calling me on the road, though I can't remember its name. I went off the beaten path when I first left home. I've never walked alone to any place other than my own path. I walk past your window. I don't cast a shadow. I speak, but I am not heard. My words fall silently over the edge of the earth. The immobility felt like death, and I began to think that being a ghost was not the solution I needed. It was a bad omen for my future, and for a while, the loss of my former life consumed me. I spent the rest of the day walking around Williamsburg with the crowds of people that fill the town in the summer, and stopping by the wonderful artisans and craftsmen doing their thing. I even caught an impromptu student performance in the brick plaza at the top of Duke of Gloucester Street. Being surrounded by people and activity again cleansed me and lifted my spirits. For the first time since leaving home, I felt relaxed. The city was full of hotels, and with a little effort I managed to find a room despite having no reservations. It wasn't until I had eaten a light dinner and settled in for the night that my thoughts finally returned to my failed marriage. She was just coming home. I wonder what she'll think when she sees the "for sale" sign on the front lawn, and her keys won't unlock the door. The next day I turned north and drove through the backcountry toward Annapolis, the capital of Maryland, past small towns and old plantations along Virginia's ancestral rivers like the York, Rappahannock, and Potomac, which flow into the Chesapeake Bay. This is the land of the Revolution and the Civil War. Bobby Lee's daddy, Lighthorse Harry Lee, had a place next to the road. As I drove through the back roads past the corn and cantaloupe farms, my thoughts returned to the house in Raleigh, to the life left behind, and I wondered why things had come to this. However, the point of this trip was to take my mind off those thoughts to some degree, so I tried to focus on the road and the countryside. The road and my thoughts seemed to merge into one. Ahead was a single ribbon of asphalt that led me toward my future. I would follow that winding ribbon as it led me away from betrayal and toward a new life. I left Williamsburg early and slipped quietly into Annapolis in time for a lunch of crab cakes and local beer. That lifted my spirits. I wandered the waterfront looking at the boats, chatted with locals and passing sailors, and sat down to lunch of steamed crabs and beer. Can anything say more clearly about Maryland than that? I sat at a picnic table with 4 people I didn't know, and we became fast friends because steamed crab picking is a slow process that leaves plenty of time for conversation. We told each other our life story, and by the end of the conversation, they knew about my impending divorce, and I knew the name of each grandchild. At one point, as we talked about life and marriage, I saw myself through their eyes. I must have really looked like an odd duck. I left my wife, left my home, and drove across the state, slowly traveling north alone. I told them that her lies and betrayal had caused me to pull away from her and our life together, and that sampling the cuisine of each state and meeting people by driving through them was my way of measuring off the miles and moving on, taking it to the next level and leaving the past behind. I had no intention of going back. My life as I knew it was over, and a new life had begun. They seemed to understand me, wished me well, and as we parted, I thanked them for their company. Sitting in my hotel room in downtown Annapolis, I finally picked up my cell phone and turned it on. No surprise there. It was full of missed calls, emails, and text messages. Most of them were from Karen, and a few were from friends. I read and listened to them all. It was hard, but it had to be done. At first, Karen tried to tell me that all was not as it seemed. Of course it wasn't. They were messages she had sent from Illinois before she got home, saw the rest of the pictures, and read a copy of the private investigator's report. My friends told me that Karen was now calling everyone trying to find me. She was just looking in the wrong place. Jake and his wife knew, but I purposely left the rest of them in the dark. I'll tell them as soon as I get settled. I already knew I couldn't play the ghost forever. The 2 calls that scared me were from my daughters. Karen was calling them, trying to find out where I was. I purposely didn't tell them I was leaving their mother because I wanted to do it in person, but I couldn't let them worry. So I called the girls and calmly explained to them what was going on. They were upset and couldn't believe their mom could do such a thing. So I sent them the same pictures I had sent Karen the night I left home, as well as the private investigator's report for them to read. After that, they vowed not to tell my mother what I was doing. There was another missed call. My attorney informed me that Karen had been served with divorce papers. Now she knew I was serious. He also informed me that Frank's wife had received a complete set of photos, video, and audio recordings from his 6-week seminar. Take that, Frank. On the 3rd day, I drove through northern Maryland and then arrived in New Jersey with great anticipation. Yes, that's right. I took the Jersey line and didn't stop until I got to Connecticut. Once in Connecticut, I carved out a few hours to drive through the historic towns along the coast. I wasn't looking for anything special, but the architecture was so starkly different from North Carolina that I had a very strong sense of being in a new place, both physically and emotionally. And don't tell the government, but I spent an hour in Groton trying to see as many submarines as possible. Boy, how well they hide those blackfish. As I looked up and down the coast, I remembered that when nuclear boats are refueled, they cut a hole in the hull to refuel the reactor and then weld the hull back together. Was this a metaphor for me? Was Karen's betrayal, which punched a hole in my heart, nothing more than the first step to refueling my life? Would I be able to heal myself as my new life began? I spent the night in a small motel near Mystic. After 3 days of driving, with only my thoughts to keep me company, I began to ponder again the genesis of my failed marriage. It had failed not in those 6 weeks of betrayal in Illinois. It began to fail a year before that, when the last of our daughters moved out. It failed when she didn't want me to be a part of her writing life, when she stopped reading her work to me, and when she made me feel unwelcome when her writers' club gathered at our house. It all went downhill when she started keeping secrets and making plans for 6 weeks without telling me. Was she looking for a fresh start, or did she need to feel some independence while enjoying the security of a devoted husband? Did she decide that with the girls grown and out of the house, the marriage had served its purpose and it was time to start a new life? Did I become a liability to her or just didn't matter? We got married right out of college. I assumed she went from her father's house to mine right away. Did she? Did she never really stand on her own 2 feet? God knows, her authority in our house was unquestioned. Was this my big mistake? Had I devalued myself by trying to provide her with the life she wanted? Or had she reached a point where living together had become too restrictive for her? I had more questions than answers, but the saddest truth was that I doubted I would ever get an honest answer from her if I asked. And if I asked and got the truth, what would it matter? I had so defined myself as her husband that the thought of cheating on her was unthinkable. And yet she had not only found it possible, but had degraded me to her lover. For a brief moment, I pictured their conversation into my pillow, but these images were too painful to contemplate, and I pushed them out of my mind. It was these thoughts that rushed through my brain as I sank into sleep, and I slept poorly that night. On the 4th day, I went to the museum, walked the decks of the Morgan, talked to the guides, and checked out some of the construction details of their fantastic collection of small boats. I told you I was an avid sailor until family life took over, didn't I? I finished my visit at the museum store and bought a few last books to add to my collection. I needed something to occupy my time on these cold winter evenings in Maine. What did I eat in Connecticut? I don't know if you can believe it, but Connecticut claims to be the birthplace of the hamburger. Who am I to argue? So I had a pretty good burger and hit the road. I left my phone off because I wasn't in the mood to listen to my wife cheat, and I had a meeting with my daughter scheduled. As I sat in my room, I had a weird moment of clarity when I realized that it was a good thing I wasn't getting divorced more often. I could have gained some serious weight doing that. Regardless, the trip gave me what I needed. I had quiet time when I wanted to reflect on my life, and distractions and plans when I didn't. By taking the time to drive north, I was taking the time to put the past behind me and prepare to start my life anew. When I got up on day 5, I knew it was going to be the hardest day yet. After eating a breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon and toast and washing it down with good black coffee, I headed to Brown and a terribly painful conversation with my oldest daughter, Claire. The drive didn't take long, and in the late morning I met her outside her dorm. We agreed to put our conversation on hold so she could pretend to be happy for at least an hour or two. She showed me around campus and then took me to the cafeteria, where she introduced me to all of her friends. They were exactly the young men and women I hoped she would find. They were pleasant, attentive, and seemed to be mutually supportive. As we were leaving, I took her roommate aside and told her that Claire was going to have a rough day. I asked her to watch my daughter. She replied, "Yes, Mr. Baker, she told us that last night. We are all here for her." Yes. My daughter has chosen her friends well. We sat in Claire's dorm room and talked for hours. I showed her pictures and played audio recordings I never thought I would ever share with my child. She alternated between sadness and rage. I can't believe she did this. Is this really the same woman who raised us? What kind of filthy tramp has she become? I had to stop her, though I agreed. Claire, no matter what she did, she's still your mother. Besides, it was me she betrayed, not you. I'm sorry to disagree with you, Dad, but she destroyed my only family. She definitely did that to me. I couldn't argue with that. We talked until lunchtime and I told her all my plans. I told her to gather her friends and we went out for the best dinner in town, or the best I could afford. Everyone seemed happy to take a break from the dining room menu. I told them stories about my dining hall adventures when I was in college, and I think they went back to their dorms with a new appreciation for their current situation. I got a room in town, and the next morning I had breakfast with my daughter, hugged her to tears, and then headed north to Boston to do it all over again. Claire must have called Denise, because the latter took the news much better than her older sister. There was just as much frustration and anger in her, but much less surprise. She asked for proof, and I showed it to her. Fortunately, her mother had called during our conversation, and I gave her the universal, "No, I'm not here" sign. I shook my head, waved my arms like a madman, and ran my finger across my throat like a knife. She nodded. Denise had always been the less dramatic member of the family. Then she did something I thought I'd never see. She said, "Dad called last night. Is it true you've become a slut who cheats on her husband and lies about it?" I was at a loss for words. I wanted to tell her off for talking to her mother like that, but at the same time I had to agree with what she said. "You heard me, Mom. You spent 6 weeks being some creep's girlfriend while your husband stayed home alone. Was it worth it, Mom? Was it worth losing your marriage over?" Oh, crap. That daughter of mine has a mouth. Remind me never to piss her off. After that, the conversation was short-lived. Denise told me that her mother mostly cried and tried to make excuses when she could, but my daughter wasn't buying it. Later, I took her and her friends to a Thai restaurant near campus called Elephant Walk. Like her sister, Denise picked her friends well, and the dinner was very enjoyable. As we were walking back to campus, one of her friends said, "Mr. Baker, Denise told us what you were going through. She was very sad last night, but we supported her. I hope you will come back someday and let us take you to the cafeteria." That made the rest of the friends laugh. "Well, actually, maybe we can find a better place than this." That elicited giggles, and we laughed all the way back to her dorm. I found a room for the night, took my daughter to breakfast in the morning, and continued north on the 7th day. I left Boston and was only 2 hours south of Portland. Now I thought less about my soon-to-be ex-wife and more about my daughters. They were growing up to be strong, principled girls, and I was very proud of them. I knew now that they would survive the impending divorce better than I had feared. This day was hard because of the fact that I was leaving these 2 wonderful jewels behind me with no promise of when I would see them again. Turns out I shouldn't have worried. I wasn't ready to face the reality of starting a new life yet, so after reaching Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I turned west and headed for the White Mountains and Presidential Range. I drove into the White Mountains and took the Cog Railroad to the top of Mount Washington. As I stood there, looking across the hollow at the smaller peaks of the White Mountains and scanning the green pine forest below, feeling the cold chill of the Arctic winds that are so misplaced in the first days of August, I finally felt reborn. I stood alone, but at last I was standing. I had passed through the birth canal of the mid-Atlantic states, moving from an old life of pain and regret to a new life and all the possibilities it held. Now I stood on high ground, ready to begin life anew. Everything I could ever want lay before me. In the morning, I was brought a plate of pancakes with real maple syrup. I was now in maple syrup country and would be for years to come. Rested and ready, I got in my car and drove to Portland. I got there in the middle of the afternoon and decided to meet with my new boss to let him know I had arrived. I already knew about half of the office staff, and I was warmly welcomed. It was a pleasant experience. They were the first happy, relaxed faces I had seen in a week. My new boss's name is Henry, and he gathered the entire office to greet me. I was quickly given a tour of the store, but only after everyone had made a collective decision on where we would all go for dinner. I assumed it would be a restaurant downtown, but we ended up at Henry's house where steaks were grilled with all the condiments. I know I should have tasted lobster in Maine, but I had all the time in the world for that. It was about reintegrating into society. Over amazingly tasty steaks and great local beer, they asked me to tell them about myself. What was a Southern guy doing, dropping everything and moving to Maine at this stage of his life? So I told them. I left out all the details, but gave them enough information for them to understand. At the end, I asked them, I may be a little testy in the coming weeks. It's out of my character, but I have a lot to work through. I hope that if I misbehave, you will tell me and ask me to stop. I need a little pushback from time to time. I wasn't expecting it, but every woman hugged me and kissed my cheek, and every man put his arm around my shoulders. We're here for you, AB. That was all they said, and all they needed to say. That night, settled in my hotel room, I turned on my cell phone again. The girls had texted me with words of encouragement. They must have given my number to their friends because I had at least 8 or 10 more messages from young men and women who appreciated the dinner and wanted me to know they would be there for my daughters. I love those kids. A few friends kept getting in touch, so I decided to contact them all and tell them what was going on so they would stop worrying. I didn't tell them where I was. That would come later. I only told them about why I left. They didn't want to believe it, so I sent them the same 3 pictures I had sent Karen and told them I had much worse if that didn't convince them. I thought about it, but I honestly didn't see any reason to defend her from her own decisions. I had already tried and failed, so let the chips fall. Over time, I received messages of love and support from them all and promised to stay in touch. It quickly became clear to me that my plans to become a ghost were just a fantasy. Too many people cared about me, and that's a good thing. I read the remaining text messages from Karen and listened to the missed calls. She had finally admitted what she had done, but her confession was colored by strange bursts of anger. She somehow blamed me for what she had done, for what I had done, and for everything that had happened. Well, screw that shit. I texted her and told her I'd call her the next day at noon. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Let's just say it was an unsatisfying conversation. She alternated between accusations, blame, and denial. She was sorry. Frank's personality was overwhelming her. I was suffocating her. It was my fault because I was working too hard. It was nothing like that. They were just fooling around, but nothing serious. I almost burst out laughing when she told me she was just trying to find her muse. She even accused me of turning our daughters against her, as if her own actions hadn't led to this without my help. When she finally stopped talking, I laid it out plain and simple for her. She had conspired with Frank to cheat on me. She had resisted my attempts to keep us together. She had committed treason, and now she was paying the price. I no longer cared why. When I hung up the phone, she was still crying and defending her righteousness. I was done with her. There was no going back. I knew too much. I found a simple but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in an old building within walking distance of the office. I figured I could use the exercise and thought it would be temporary, but my thoughts soon changed. I could live simply in the city, avoiding the extra work associated with the house, and rent a small cottage on the coast for the weekends. Then I thought, why a cottage? I could buy a boat, keep it in the harbor, and that would be my cottage on the coast. By the time I realized all this, it was early fall. I expected to live a lonely life, but it didn't really turn out that way. I see my daughters more often now than when I lived in Raleigh. They come at least one weekend every month and always bring a few friends with them. For 36 hours, my apartment turns into a beehive, and somehow I always manage to have them all over for dinner. By the time they leave, I desperately need some peace and quiet, though I miss them as soon as they walk out the door. I've also been surprised that a few of my friends have come to visit me, and the rest of them promise to come when the weather gets better. I live alone, but I'm not lonely. I have an increasing number of new friends, both from work and my adventures. The seafaring community here is vibrant and welcoming, and I've met some interesting women in my wanderings, but I'll be on my best behavior until the marriage is officially and legally dissolved. I still hear from Karen, even though the divorce will soon be final. She's never really repented and prefers to say I'm too much. All she says is, "Everyone does it. It doesn't mean anything." Yes, it does. Sex means a lot, and lies and manipulation mean even more. I thought about explaining it to her, but people change and I didn't see the point anymore. The truth is, I haven't been able to completely separate my life from hers. With 2 daughters and many mutual friends, I know that will never happen. However, with 600 miles between us, I no longer live with the daily rejection and betrayal. She was the most important being in my life until I was no longer hers. Now I have my own life and future to build on my own. A few good things have come out of all this. First of all, I really like it here. I'm experiencing my first Maine winter, and it's a bit of a shock. But if they can do it, so can I. It gets dark early here, but in a way that makes sitting indoors warmer and brighter. I started looking for a boat and found a boatyard with docks just outside of town, so I think I'll be able to splice fishing line and apply varnish in the spring. The restaurants here are good, the micros are great, and the people are genuine. There's music of all kinds, dancing if you're willing to learn contra dance, and surprises I'm still discovering. I think life is going to favor me after all. Is my heart refueled? Not yet, but time heals, and I know a better life lies ahead. Oh, and Frank's wife seems to be a dinosaur as stuck in the past as I am. She kicked his worthless ass out of the house and divorced him. Worse, both Karen and Frank remained unpublished. Part 2. I was married to a woman named Karen until the day came when I stopped being a wife. I've told you before how that happened. This is the story of how I made a new life for myself and eventually found love again. My wife cheated on me with a lowlife, a man who was married and had 2 children, yet cheated on his own wife when he went to bed with mine. She tried to hide her cheating, but she couldn't hide her growing disrespect for me. My wife was a frustrated writer, and as our 2 girls left for college, her attention gradually shifted from our marriage to writing and then to this other adventure. I spent 25 years devoted to her, our girls, and our life together. But once the girls left, I seemed to become unimportant to her. I think she began to see me as an obstacle to writing success, as if it was my fault that no publisher was interested in her work. I suppose every unsuccessful artist needs someone to blame, as long as the blame doesn't fall on themselves. But I think the truth has more to do with the fact that I was successful and happy in my career, and she never was. I don't know when the affair began, but I do know that within 6 weeks she was sharing a bed with Frank. I know that nothing I tried could dissuade her from the betrayal, and that once I committed it, I could never put it behind me again. So I became the ghost of my marriage. While she was away enjoying fantasies of being a great, albeit aspiring writer and sharing a bed with Frank, I packed my things and set out for my new destination. I got a transfer from my company's office in Raleigh, North Carolina, to an office in Portland, Maine, and spent a week driving around highways and back roads on my way to my new life. I sampled regional cuisine, talked to people, and took in the sights along the way. I thought that with enough time and distractions, I could erase her memory from my mind. I was wrong. I also spent 2 days with my beautiful and amazing daughters, who were in college at Brown and Boston University, trying to explain to them what had happened and why I could never stay with their mother. They understood and supported me. I eventually made it to Portland, where I met other engineers and technicians in my new office and rented a 2-bedroom apartment near work. Well, that should bring you up to speed regarding my life at that point. Eventually, things settled down. It didn't take me long to realize that I would enjoy living in Portland. It was mid-August when I got settled, so it was still summer. There were several sailors in my office, and they quickly introduced me to other sailors, so before long I was well into the sailing life. Any skipper is usually looking for a capable crew, and I quickly became familiar with sailing. Sailing is like riding a bicycle. When you haven't ridden one for a long time, you can be a bit frazzled at first, but it all comes back quickly. By September, I had become a regular crew member on a J-24 yacht racing in Casco Bay, and we were doing pretty well until the fall season closed and the yacht was put away for the season. Admittedly, I was head over heels in work, and I am familiar with the admonition that all work and no play. But such is the life of a single man over 50 who lives alone. I'm not a big drinker, so I find bars somewhat tedious if I'm out alone. 1 or 2 nights a week I'd meet up with someone from work or the sailing community, and we'd have dinner and a beer or two. Other nights I cooked by myself, and on those nights I worked from home, both for something to do and everything else. I know that sounds boring, but I had a lot to think about while my lawyer was working on my divorce, and a man can think too much when it comes to things like that. Better to have something to occupy my thoughts. My wife, Karen, called far more often than I would have liked, considering I wanted the calls to go away. Each call only reopened a wound that was slowly healing. She tried everything I expected and some things I didn't even imagine. She made promises, but what are promises when vows are broken? She threatened, but she had no more leverage over me. She missed and loved me, and in some twisted way I did think she did, but not enough to be faithful. She begged, but every time she did, I remembered those images of her in bed with Frank and my sympathy for her evaporated. She even threatened to come to Portland and bring me back, but I convinced her that she wouldn't be warmly received. I didn't want to threaten her or treat her with hatred for what she had done, but I would do it if it was necessary. Love dies slowly, even when trust is broken. But now I couldn't go back to her. It's been summer, and I've always heard about fall in New England, but until you experience it, you think it's just pretty leaves. It's apple picking, outdoor concerts and fairs, and I had a growing legion of friends to share it with. I'm addicted to fresh squeezed apple cider, pleasantly warm sunny days with cool nights, and a palpable sense that something big is just around the corner. Winter in Maine is definitely something big. I tried to prepare for it by wearing warm clothes and heavy boots, but I still had a lot to learn. All this time and with every call, Karen was hiding some secret from me. When Frank's wife kicked him out of the house, he moved in with Karen. This little nugget of deception was told to me by my loving daughters, who I convinced to keep in contact with their mother. She wasn't much of a wife, but she was a good mother to the girls. And even at their age, girls need a mom sometimes. The girls learned about Frank from their grandmother. The first week I was gone, Karen called almost everyone we knew trying to find me. The only people she didn't call were my parents, her parents, and our siblings. I suppose that would have raised too many questions. Soon, probably from our mutual friends, word got out that I was missing, and her mother came to comfort her daughter. You can imagine her surprise when she discovered that a strange man was living with her daughter in the house that had shortly before been my home. As usual, my wife's explanation was less than truthful, and after 5 decades of knowing her daughter, my mother-in-law found Karen's lies transparent. Karen's mother told my daughters about it with some trepidation, and they patiently, if not tactfully, retold the story of my betrayal. As it turned out, their grandmother had called her daughter a word I'd never heard her use before, and for which her husband would have punched me in the face if I'd ever used it toward his daughter. Funny how quickly life can change. October passed, and Halloween was fast approaching. My girls came to visit me at least one weekend every month, but Halloween is not a school holiday and they stuck around at school. Still, I know they went to class in their costumes and sent me selfies for fun, but I wish I had been there for them. There were young families all around me, and the night I opened the door and greeted all those young ghouls and pretty ballerinas, my spirits rose to their highest point since I left Raleigh. Karen's calls were getting less frequent, but their tone didn't change. She fought the divorce. Eventually, my attorney threatened to release the most damaging and embarrassing evidence my private investigator had gathered, and that's when Karen gave up. She stopped fighting the divorce and began negotiating to get as much of our assets as possible. Eventually, she had no more cards left to play, but it took months. As painful as betrayal can be, after 25 years of marriage, you greet the realization that it's about to end with genuine regret and a terrible sense of loss. It didn't make me change my mind, but like a death in the family, I grieved. My life went on and got better. Thanksgiving was approaching, and my daughters decided to spend it with me. As with every trip, they took some friends with them. On this trip, it was mostly friends who couldn't make it home for the holiday, and since both daughters were there at the same time, we had a full house. Those who didn't sleep in the spare bedroom took sleeping bags with them and stretched out on the floor. It was a women's group, so I just went to bed in my room and quietly prayed, reminding myself that they had every day on campus to do things I hoped they wouldn't do in my apartment. I tried to make a traditional Thanksgiving dinner, but the women wouldn't let me do it. "Dad, we'll manage. Go enjoy the game." Two smiling young women who were not my daughters took me by the shoulders, turned me around, and escorted me out. With those words, I departed, leaving the cooking in their capable hands. From time to time, I glanced into the kitchen, and what I saw could only be described as directed chaos. It was a joyous sight. Dinner was delicious and delightful, and I soon realized that my only job was to ask questions that encouraged everyone to tell me stories about school, their lives, and home. The conversation around the table was lively. I learned about the guys who disappointed me and the girls who didn't. Some of the conversation was in code, but I wasn't old enough not to understand. After dinner, I tried to organize a long walk in the cold November air, but only the women joined me. The game on TV was too exciting for young men, and young women, I confess, interested me much more. I enjoyed their company, and when the young men returned to the apartment, the girls told me a few more details about their boyfriends, both past and present. It was then that Jenny spilled every last penny to my daughter. "How is your relationship with Ben going?" "Who's Ben?" I asked, in the almost sing-song tone that parents use to ferret out their daughter's secrets. "Ned, you know how young women look when they're on a roll, but still confident and cheerful?" That was the look in every one of them, except for my daughter, who was clearly doing calculations in her head. She still thought she could bluff. "Oh, he's just a boy from school." "Just a boy? You get along with all the boys?" Not like that. Dad. "Yeah?" God, she'd gotten caught. "Okay, Ben is just someone I met in my digital circuits class last semester. He's a serious student, and I think you'll like him. Claire says he's also a good dancer, Mr. Baker." That made them burst into giggles. "Okay, so this Ben is a serious student, a good dancer, and you think I'll like him. So why haven't I met him?" I was starting to feel like it was 6 of them against 1, and this time I was on the side of 6. "It's too soon, Dad. Besides, he had to go home to be with his family." "And where is that?" Okay, I was teasing her a little, but Dad has certain responsibilities, and I liked that. "Pennsylvania." "And what are his parents like?" "Oh, they're really nice." And then the look of shock on her face told me she realized she hadn't just gotten caught. "So you've met them?" "Yes." "And they're nice?" "Yes." "But it's too soon?" "I'll work on it." I knew at this point that her friends would handle it much better than I would, so I left the subject for now. I had a good opinion of my daughter's friends, and they seemed to like this young man. Plus, I knew both my daughters had a good head on their shoulders, so I was sure I shouldn't worry too much. Vacation passed, and my traveling band of gypsies headed south to their schools, leaving my batteries charged and my heart full. Life continued to seem better and better. I would need every bit of that joy and the full support of my daughters for what lay ahead. Christmas. Before my girls left for school, we had a long discussion about what to do about Christmas vacation. Karen was already furious that Claire and Denise had come to Maine for Thanksgiving instead of traveling to North Carolina to be with her. Forget the fact that Maine is 3 hours away and Raleigh is a full day away. It was all about Karen. We decided that I would buy the tickets and we would all fly back to Raleigh for Christmas. I'll stay with my parents, who are in their 70s, and there's no telling how many more years we'll spend together, and my girls will stay wherever they see fit. They decided to stay with their mother and visit friends and both grandparents whenever possible. For my part, I agreed to reconcile with my soon-to-be ex-wife and socialize with her parents, who had always liked me. Can I say it was a trip to hell and back? No, I don't think that's enough. The family decided that each of the grandparents would spend their own Christmas Eve. I'll be with my family, the girls will spend time with both of them, and toward the evening I'll visit my mother-in-law. I agreed to spend Christmas morning with Karen and the girls, and then talk to her privately before I left. It felt more like a canoodle than a holiday, but it all needed to be done. I needed to figure out my relationship with Karen, and figure out what kind of relationship I might have with her family in the future. There was no getting away from that. Karen and I had daughters in common, And someday, we would have sons-in-law and grandchildren. Our paths would cross year after year, and I was determined not to ruin any family holidays with a fight with my soon-to-be ex. My daughters and I flew to Raleigh separately and arrived late in the morning 2 days before Christmas, each flying out of airports close to school and home, and I rented 2 cars. One was rented by me and the other by the girls. They were staying longer than I was, and I figured they would want independence to see their friends and might need to get away from their mother's ranting at some point. Before leaving the airport, we sat down at a cafe and clarified our plans. Just a few minutes of chatting with these two sweet and energetic young women put my thoughts in order. I immediately decided that I was going to enjoy the vacation the best I could and not let Karen ruin it for either of us. After signing the rental papers, loading the suitcases, and getting one last couple of hugs, I quietly watched these two sweet and very mature girls drive away. I know they have a lot of independence in school, but there's nothing like a car to make a young person feel completely independent and free. Watching them drive away, I felt that they would enjoy these days no matter what else happened. I made it to my parents' house and settled in for a quiet conversation. They were interested in my new life in Maine, made a few disparaging remarks about Northerners, and I assured them I had survived the Maine winter. Dad is a retired engineer, so we chatted about business for a while. Mom wondered if I was eating right. What can I say? Once you become a kid in my mom's house, you're a kid for life. I guess that's how she shows her love. Eventually, we got to the elephant in the room. So, we had a long and very painful conversation with Karen's parents. Apparently, her mother met the man she is now living with. I assume you know something about that? Yes, Mom. It's Frank, the man she cheated with. Well, Betty didn't like him at all. She said he gave her the creeps when he tried to be charming and sweet. She said he looked like a man who would steal her purse if he had the chance. Well, he stole my wife, so the purse doesn't seem like such a big deal. You know your mom and I were really worried about you that first week you were gone. We had no idea where you were or if you were even alive. Please don't do that to us again, son. I won't, Dad. I'm sorry for what I did. I wanted to disappear so Karen would never find me, and I'm afraid I took the all-or-nothing approach. It was crazy. I should have known I couldn't disappear for real, and I didn't want you to worry. I promise I'll never do that again. I assume you're done with her? There's no going back? Never. I'm done. I know I didn't give you enough detail about what happened, but I found out that she might be planning to cheat on me about a month and a half before she left town for a writing seminar in Illinois. I still don't know if she had cheated on me before that, but for the 6 weeks she spent at the seminar, she slept in Frank's bed and acted like they were newlyweds. I tried everything I could to keep her from going or let me go with her, but I couldn't stop her. I was never sure if she would cheat until she did. But in the last 6 weeks before the seminar, I had a bad feeling about it. I even begged her not to do anything that could ruin our marriage, but she only rebuked me for my suspicions. Once she did that, the marriage was over as far as I was concerned. Even if I could forgive her, and in all this time she has never once apologized to me, I don't know how I could ever trust her again. I'm sorry, Dad, but the marriage is over. My father took a pause to gather his thoughts. Okay, I'll say this in front of your mother, so she can't accuse me of saying it behind her back. If I were in your shoes, I'd do the same thing. You old goat, if I were in his shoes, I'd do it faster and cut your balls off in the process. Mom has a way with words. Dad looked at Mom and smiled. It's nice to feel wanted. Mom just hummed and clapped Dad on the knee. Are you going to see her on this trip? I don't think I can avoid it. Maybe we can clear the air and start building a new relationship so I don't have to be a burden to the girls. I promised to spend Christmas morning with Claire and Denise, and after the girls go off to their friends, I'll talk to Karen. Maybe she'll realize that we both need to be allowed to move on with our lives. Geez, is that it? Merry Christmas. I think Dad realized what kind of Christmas celebration awaited me. I promised to see her family on Christmas Eve after we have dinner. The girls have promised to have dinner with us first and then go there with me, so it won't be too stressful. I wouldn't worry about it being bad. Karen's mother is still furious about her behavior. As soon as she found out what Karen did, she practically disowned her. Now she thinks you're some kind of saint for being so forgiving. I'm forgiving? I ran away before she got home and moved 600 miles away to be away from her. AB, you left her the damn house. And with her teacher's salary, it's the only home she'll ever have. That shows how smart I am, Dad. I left her the house, and just as fast she moved Frank in there. I heard that Frank's wife is divorcing him. Mom, how are you hearing all this? I'm a good listener, and Karen's mom likes to talk. Right now, her favorite topic of conversation is how her idiot daughter traded away and lost a good man. I've always liked her. So it's true? What's true? That I gave Frank's wife everything I had on their affair? You bet it's true. Mom only shook her head as if disapproving, but a wry smile gave away her true feelings. Dad laughed outright. The day went better from there. I helped them do a few chores around the house that they'd been putting off, and we put up the last of the decorations. I told them about my life and new friends in Portland, while they filled me in on everything I'd missed since leaving Raleigh. Then I helped with dinner. It was a very enjoyable afternoon and evening. In the morning, I helped clean the house for the guests, set the dining room table, and prepare the food. Christmas Eve dinner was set for 2 p.m., and by the time the food was ready, the house was filled with everyone I hadn't seen in many months. My brother and sister arrived with food, family, and kisses, and a few cousins and friends dropped by unannounced just to say hello. Of course, everyone wanted to hang out with my daughters, who were enjoying the attention, and friends and family asked me quiet questions about the divorce and how I was coping. By dinner time, the distant relatives had mostly dispersed, and after dinner we exchanged gifts. The grandchildren, as they do every year in my family, did well. My siblings and I exchanged gifts and laid out a pile of carefully wrapped and shipped presents in front of my parents. They said, as usual, "Oh, you shouldn't have. This is too much. I don't know where to begin." When it was over, they said, "You really went overboard this year." They probably would have said the same thing if we had only gotten them a bag of socks. My parents are the same way. In the early evening, it was finally time to meet my in-laws. This was something I wasn't looking forward to, despite the words of encouragement I received from family members. I suppose by this time I had a mountain of regrets built up, but not about leaving, but about how I left. Disappearing like that with no explanation and then dropping a couple of nasty pictures on everyone to explain my decision was not the way to go about it. I owed more to these people, and it was time to make things right. The three of us walked up to the house, and no sooner had I rung the bell than the door opened. My father-in-law was a good man, and no one in his family doubted his love, but he couldn't be called demonstrative with the men in the family. After hugging his granddaughters, he walked around them both and hugged me. It was the first time since we had met that he had done something like that. In a quiet voice, almost too quiet to be heard, he said, "We're sorry, A.B. We thought we raised her better than that. Please forgive us." With that one gesture, a terrible weight was lifted off my shoulders. "I'm sorry too, Jim. I should have explained things to you myself. I shouldn't have just taken off like that. Believe me, A.B., no one blames you. Karen hasn't been forthright with us, but we know what's up." My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law escorted us into the house where my mother-in-law hugged each of us and burst into tears. She was both happy to see us and saddened by the circumstances. I had always liked Anne and admired her. She gave her whole heart to her family and was vulnerable as a result. I kissed her on the cheek and thanked her for the invitation. "Of course, A.B., you are still family and always will be." She buried her face in my chest for a moment, and I felt her shudder, crying quietly. All I could do was hug her and assure her that I would love her and her husband forever, for all the love and support they had given me. I was stunned. I was divorcing their daughter, and all they responded to was that they loved me. From that point on, everyone welcomed me as family, kissed my daughters, and did everything they could to make me feel welcome. Karen seemed to step back as her family hugged me. I guess things weren't going exactly as she had planned. We spent several hours talking about our lives. The girls told everyone about college, and I told everyone about Maine. Nothing was said about why I was now living up north, and it seemed like Karen was getting more and more worried as her family took in the stories about my new life. Everyone had already eaten, but I was offered a beer and a plate of leftovers. I gladly accepted the beer and handed over the plate. The girls received gifts from their grandparents, and they loved everything they received. The grandparents raved about them like they were long-lost relatives who had finally come home. I kept laughing to myself and thinking, they've only been in school. I had a gift for both Jim and Anne. I felt I owed them a debt of gratitude, and they in turn gave me the heaviest sweater I had ever seen. We thought you might need it up north. Up north? I could walk to the Arctic Pole in it and not freeze, but I thanked them profusely. As I left, I took a moment to hug Karen and remind her that I'd see her in the morning. It wasn't so much a promise of more as a gesture meant to heal a grudge. At that moment, I couldn't understand her, and I didn't know what she was thinking. In the evening, I returned to my parents' house and we discussed what had happened. I told you they don't hold you responsible, AB. They've got it all figured out. I know. Still, I expected them to try to convince me to bring her back. But they never did. We spent the evening talking and over a glass or two of sherry. My mother doesn't like hard alcohol, but a glass of sherry on a cold night seems to make everything right. Christmas morning found me at my old house opening presents with Karen and my girls. It was Christmas and we were still a family, at least for a while. We had been a family for 25 years, and old habits are ineradicable. I bought various gifts for my daughters, and then gave Karen and the girls each a pair of matching opal earrings. I thought perhaps we should celebrate the family bond at Christmas this year, and the girls liked the idea of getting earrings like their mothers. We had breakfast, and after the allotted time, the girls left for their friends, and I was left alone with Karen. We settled down in the living room, and she began her story. You know, I never meant for this to happen, AB. I just got caught up in the excitement about the seminar and being back in college. You planned this months in advance, Karen. I overheard your conversations with Frank. You even sent me to Canada to get out of the way. At this, she got angry. Those tickets cost me a lot of money, AB, and you just gave them away. It was a bribe, Karen. A distraction so I wouldn't find out what you were up to. I still can't believe you hired a private investigator. I would have told you if you'd only asked. There were never any secrets between us, AB. What nonsense! I told you I knew what your plans were and begged you not to do anything that would ruin our marriage. You denied everything and lied to my face. You're putting too much importance on that, AB. After 25 years, I deserve some time to myself. And if you'd stayed yourself, we wouldn't be divorced right now. You stayed with Frank, slept with him, and had fun with him night after night. That was only 6 weeks after 25 years. Why can't you get over it? It doesn't have to be the end of us. I'm sorry, Karen, but it is. Maybe I'm selfish, or maybe you and Frank are just more worldly educated than I am, but I don't share. Those vows we made meant a lot to me, but when I saw you cheating, I just didn't have anything to hold on to. It's your little male ego. I've always been there for you. I've never left your side. You just can't accept that I want a little more. Maybe. I don't know if my ego is small, but I know my self-esteem is big enough to deserve more than a part-time wife from my marriage. If you come back, I'm done with Frank. Tell me something, Karen. If we go upstairs now, will I find his clothes in my closet? No. Was it hanging there last week? She didn't answer. Karen, I know Frank moved in with you after I left. I think you're hedging your bet. Maybe you'll be done with Frank if I come home, maybe not. But you'll keep Frank on a leash while I'm not here. That's true, isn't it, Karen? He's only here because you've gone away. You're out there living the bachelor life. Do you think I should be living like a nun? Actually, Karen, I live like a faithful married man away from home. There are no other women. I don't go on dates. I'm just trying to build a new life in a new place with new friends. I work hard and sometimes have a beer or dinner with coworkers. That's my life. And I've gotten back into sailing. Remember how I got into sailing before the girls came along? Well, I started working on the boat before it got really cold. We did Wednesday night races and weekend regattas, and we were doing pretty well. I've started looking at getting my own boat and I'm enjoying it. I'm trying to talk to you about our marriage, and you're talking about boats. You've always been a selfish bastard. I sat there for a minute, looking at her and waiting. No apology followed. Karen never took anything back, ever, and this time was no exception. Okay, Karen, I think it's time for me to leave. I'm flying home tomorrow. I have my new life in Maine and you have Frank. I hope you realize this was a good deal. I really hope so. With those words, I took my coat and walked out of the house that was mine, that had been ours for so many years. It was the house where we had built our marriage and raised our girls, but it was no longer my home. I would come back here for family holidays, but I would always be a guest, and for the first time, I was at peace with my decision. I was truly ready to move on. I spent the rest of the day with my parents, saw the girls when they stopped by to show off their new earrings to their grandparents, and flew home the next day. Sitting in my chair, I went over the events of the last few days in my mind, thought about how proud I was of my daughters, and offered a prayer of thanks that Karen's family seemed to understand my decision. If I fought with them, It would only make my daughter's lives more difficult. My only problem was finalizing the divorce, and then I could socialize with Karen on the rare occasions I got to see her again. I had left Raleigh 5 months before, intending to become a ghost, to disappear and stay out of sight. But I was returning to Maine a whole person again, with a family, daughters, and a life that had great potential. The pain was gone, and Karen's betrayal no longer defined me. I was ready to live again. In the years that followed, I told friends and family, I couldn't help it. I just fell in love with her. So many years have passed, and she still laughs at that corny joke. We landed in Portland, and I was standing at the baggage carousel impatiently waiting for my suitcase when it finally appeared. I quickly grabbed the handle and ran to my car. All I wanted to do was get home and put this whole trip behind me. I turned around, took a half step, tripped over both feet, and fell face first to the ground. I have to tell you, a fall like that when you're a student can be brushed off, but when you're a little over 50, it's a different matter. After gathering my courage and dealing with my embarrassment, I rolled onto my back, propped myself up on my elbows, and tried to catch my breath. I was in pain and a little disoriented. Then this cute face with brown hair and a few streaks of gray leaned over to me and asked, "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think I'm fine." In fact, I suddenly felt much better than okay. Who was that angel with the concerned look on her face? I didn't realize it right away, but she knelt down beside me, put her hand on my chest, and spoke to me in the most soothing voice, even though it was clear to anyone that she was, at least for a moment, worried. "I'm so sorry. It was all my fault. Did you hurt yourself?" After asking this, she placed her other hand on my forehead and then ran it over my head. Is there any man in the world who doesn't react to a woman making such a fuss over him? She knelt down on that dirty floor, and the only thing she cared about was making sure I was okay. I thanked her, assured her I'd be fine, paused for a moment to gaze into her face, and then, smiling, began to pick my feet up under me, trying to stand up. "Are you sure? Maybe you should just lie here for a minute." I thought about it, but I was getting better by the second. I couldn't take my eyes off of her. As I got to my feet and brushed my pants off, I realized that the reason I had fallen was because, in my hurry to get home, I had tripped over her roller bag. Like I said, I couldn't help myself. I just fell in love with it. She apologized, and by this time I was giggling. "I'll be fine. It's my fault for not watching where I was going." "Oh, I'm so embarrassed about this. Is there anything I can do to help?" Be honest, when a beautiful woman says something like that, what are you going to do? I paused, weighed my options, and said, "Well, if you have a few minutes, you might agree to have a cup of coffee with me. There's a coffee shop over there, and I probably shouldn't be driving so soon after my fall." Okay. I went a little overboard, but she smiled when I said that. I guess a cup of coffee wouldn't hurt. Mrs. Baker didn't raise fools, so I smiled and made a gesture as if to say, "You lead, and I'll follow." I wish I had been as nimble, but I actually had to run my fingers through my hair first, gather my bag, then my briefcase, and take off my jacket. But I was as quick as I could be and soon followed her to her table. As she stepped back, she looked back at me as I tried to gather my thoughts, and I saw a brief smile with a hint of the shy embarrassment I'd hoped to see again. The airport coffee shop didn't have service, so I asked how she was feeling, walked over to the "Order Here" sign, and soon brought her the fanciest coffee in a paper cup that only $5 could buy. Her name was Kate, and still is. At that first coffee shop table, we got to talking about what made us arrive on the same plane. She was vacationing with her daughter Rose, who had moved south about 3 years ago with her husband Gabe, who had gotten a good job in my old home state, and of course I told her a brief and very streamlined version of my recent departure and return for the vacations. "Oh, AB, that's awful. I wish I could say I don't understand, but I understand it all perfectly. My husband has been a terrible cheater. I caught him at least 3 times during our marriage." "Why did you stay with him?" "I stayed because of the children. They were little, and they needed a father, no matter what kind of father he was. I stayed until the youngest went off to college, and then I divorced him. It's hard to break those bonds, isn't it? Even after betrayal and pain, it's hard to leave. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But I knew he'd never stop. He couldn't. I don't know what was wrong with him, but eventually I realized that his cheating wasn't because of me. There is something missing in him, and he needs to chase women to find it. For him, it's like eating peanuts. He gets what he needs, and then eventually he needs another peanut. He'll do it until the day he dies. There was sadness in her eyes. I was drawn to those brown eyes. There were noticeable crow's feet in them, a sure sign of a mind trained by books and a heart tainted by sadness. Her skin had several fine, dense wrinkles that appear after decades of exposure to sun, wind, and snow. There was no mistaking that this woman had lived her life outdoors in Maine. Sometimes I feel like I've been both mother and father to my children. For over 2 decades, I was a wife and mother, but my husband would go AWOL even when he was around, so I did a lot of things on my own. I took my kids camping, taught them how to swim and ski. I think those lessons will stay with them, and I get a certain joy out of it. You can't spend all your time playing computer games. Don't I know it? I tried raising my 2 girls outdoors, but my wife was never thrilled about it. I even sold my sailboat when the girls were little because I had to choose where to spend my time, on the water or with them. Shame on you, AB. Kate grinned. You let your wife get away with too much. I had to admit, her scolding hurt a little. But she had a point. I think I've gotten a second chance with the girls. I see them more often now than when I lived in North Carolina, and I've started looking for a boat. I might be able to help you with that. I know the yachting community here, and I've heard of some nice boats for sale. I might be able to help you find something. Do you know what you want? Well, when I was young, I used to race, but that kind of thing doubles or triples the cost of sailing. I'm thinking of something 30 feet long with enough freeboard so the waves hit the sides instead of the deck. I want to sail it out of Casco Bay, so it needs to handle the offshore swell without making the crew wet. I want it dry enough so I don't have to put on protective gear, just because the wind has picked up, but I don't want it to be bad. You know what I mean? Are you planning on doing any overnight stays? Sure, a few, but I don't need any standing room at the bottom. I don't need all that wind interference from the high cabins. I like to be able to see where I'm going and dodge those lobster pots. That made her laugh a little. I want a boat that handles well and is reasonably responsive, but nothing crazy. Sounds like you're still into racing. Well, maybe a little. I smiled. I hear there are classic yacht races here? Here? Yes, Southern boy, we have classic yacht races here. She laughed again. It's a good sign when you can make a beautiful woman laugh. We talked for far longer than anyone would want to spend in an airport cafe, and I took every advantage I could to appear attentive, taking in her face, her smile, and that little bashful look when she caught me looking at her for too long. Eventually, I realized it was time. I suppose you have to go, but is there any chance we'll see each other again? I think it's possible. What do you mean? I've been gone for almost a week, so I don't know what's going on this weekend. How about dinner and maybe a movie? She only smiled, pulled a piece of paper out of her purse, and wrote down her address and phone number. Call me Friday night, and we can plan everything. Yes, Mom. I'm new here, so if you have a favorite place, be sure to tell me. She was smiling genuinely now. I can, or I can just see what you come up with. It was already late Wednesday, so I had a few days to come up with something good. Back at the apartment, I looked up my favorite establishments and got lucky. One Longfellow Square had a concert scheduled for Saturday night by one of my favorite folk musicians. I quickly called them and bought the last 2 tickets. Now all I needed was somewhere to eat dinner. I made a reservation at a nice seafood place, not too pretentious, but with a nice atmosphere, and left the Italian place on reserve in case she didn't like seafood. Then, I went out and bought a new shirt, a pair of pants that didn't have creases in them yet, and a jacket that hadn't been fashionable in the past decade. That's how it all started. Over dinner that Saturday night, she told me what she'd learned about the ways of a cheating husband, and I filled in the blanks I'd left in my own story. For a while, our dinner was in danger of being consumed by grief and anger, until I said, "We can't do this." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we can't let them poison our evening." "What do you say we let the ghosts haunt someone else for the rest of the evening?" She smiled. "Deal. So tell me about your daughters." "Well, that's all a proud father needs." I told her about my daughters, all their friends, and how they come to visit at least one weekend every month. She made me promise to take her out to breakfast the next time they came to visit, and you can bet I wasn't going to forget that request. She then told me about her daughter and son. I didn't immediately realize that we both have children who are just as wonderful, and we can be proud that we raised them right. The music that evening was delightful, warm, and intimate. You don't go to a folk concert unless you're ready to sing along to a few songs, and that night we both mustered up the courage to try to sing along. I failed, she laughed, and I sang again. Her laughter made me feel invincible. When I drove her home, she invited me out for coffee. Coffee was a code word for coffee. We sat and talked, drinking coffee and talking some more. When the conversation died down and I thought it was time for me to leave, I said, "Kate, I'd really like to see you again. Is that possible?" "Yes, AB, very possible." She smiled and paused to stare intently into her mug. "But I need to say something." "I can't. Don't want to get involved with a married man." "I understand. My divorce is due to be finalized in March, and I'm not going to change my mind about it. How about we limit it to friendship for now? I love being with you, AB, but I don't want to feel guilty looking in the mirror. Believe me, I understand. I think I'd be more comfortable that way too." Now it was my time to stare intently into my mug. "But I have to be honest with you, Kate. I'd like to see my new friend more often if she's willing." She was smiling broadly now. "I think she's more than willing." I received a very chaste kiss on the cheek as I left her that evening. I got another when I picked her up for dinner the following Wednesday night, and another when I drove her home. For a guy who had been married for a very long time, I was living large. Our life continued in this way for 10 weeks. We started seeing each other twice a week, then moved to 3 times, and on our free evenings we often called each other on the phone. On weekends, when weather permitted, she would direct me to explore Maine, taking back roads to small towns both on the coast and inland. She had a knack for finding quaint stores in small towns off the roads, and we explored them as part of our adventure. She showed me marinas, stores of aging hippie artisans, and small out-of-the-way restaurants. When we didn't go anywhere, we cooked together. I was having a great time, though I admit a quiet voice in the back of my mind was saying, "Be careful about romances on the margins. Take your time, look before you leap." I hate that voice. She met my daughters when they came to visit, and they started asking if Kate would be with them the next time they came to visit. I remember saying, "You don't like Kate? What's the problem?" "We love Kate. If she can't make it, we can come another weekend." At that, I calmed down. At the same time, I met her son and daughter. There was no doubt that they were cut from the same cloth as my own daughters, and when we introduced the 4 of them plus one husband, we were forever outnumbered. Kate told me that she had a heart-to-heart talk with her children about us just being friends. She said they didn't buy it, and as the weeks went by, neither did I. I talked to my girls about the same thing, and they just smirked. I'm being serious. Kate and I agreed that as long as I was married to your mother, we would play by the rules. I won't do anything to break my vows, at least not until they're dissolved. We know, Dad, and if Mom hadn't been foolish, you'd still be a faithful husband, but she did. You deserve to be happy, Daddy, and Kate will make you happy. Besides, we like her. Yeah, Mom doesn't like her, but we do. What does your mom know about Kate? They looked at each other confused. I'm sorry, Dad. Don't be mad, but we kind of told her about Kate. You'd think I was relieved to hear that, but that wasn't the case. The months I'd spent from August until Christmas, and then the weeks since I'd met Kate, had taken their toll on me. I had come to terms with Karen's betrayal and moved on, and I was happy. 7 months ago, I would have celebrated Karen's misery and fueled her jealousy. I would have rubbed her nose in it, but I wasn't like that now. There was no point in pouring salt on her wounds. Her life was her punishment. Kate and I continued to explore our developing friendship. We spent many evenings together, but at night we slept alone in our own beds. One evening in late March, my life changed again when I came home from work and read the mail. In a manila envelope from my attorney's office was the final judgment of my divorce from Karen. I had seen the end of my marriage with my own eyes when I viewed the videotape taken in Illinois in late June. I now had legal confirmation of my freedom. No matter how much I thought I was ready for it, no matter how hard I worked for it, when it happens, the realization hits you hard. 25 years of marriage and a life devoted to one woman doesn't make it easy to prepare for starting over. I sat on the couch for probably an hour or more, reflecting on the past, and when I was ready, I called Kate. Do you need some company? I can come over. I think I need to be alone tonight. I think I need to grieve for a while. Does that make sense? That makes sense. I'll let you hang out. Call me when you're ready, and if I don't hear from you in a few days, I'll call your landlord to fumigate the apartment. God help me, this woman makes me smile. I don't think it will come to that. Okay, AB, don't forget me. How can I forget you? It was just one night. I sat around, felt sorry for myself, drank a few beers, and went to bed. In the morning, I felt significantly better. I called my daughters, told them the news, and then called Kate and asked if she would go to dinner with me. "You're in luck. I'm free tonight. How about tomorrow night?" That was my attempt at flirting. After 25 years of marriage, a man loses his flirting skills and risks appearing desperate. "You're lucky again. I happen to be free both nights." "Well, how about we have dinner tonight and a drink overlooking the bay, and then we'll decide what to do tomorrow." We had a lovely evening. As I walked Kate to her door, hoping for our usual, albeit chaste, kiss on the cheek, I started to say goodnight. I saw tears in her eyes. I said I wouldn't get involved with a married man. I never said anything about a divorced man. After another kiss, she said, "And now we officially leave the friendship phase and start the dating phase, if that's okay with you?" With those words, she ran her hand over my cheek, turned around, and walked into her house. She smiled one last time and closed the door. I froze for a moment, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I thought I had the green light, and then it was gone. After a moment of fleeting frustration, I reminded myself that Kate is a serious woman. She's not going to jump into bed with me on her first free day. The friendship had been solid, and now the courtship was beginning. Realizing this, I left her porch a happy man and smiled all the way home. The next evening, it was exactly the same. After that, I was invited back into the house. Now, however, whenever we were together, whether it was a walk around town or cooking together, there was a completely different atmosphere in the house. There was an electricity in the air that was always present but always suppressed. Now it was no longer suppressed. There were token smiles, loving tones, and gentle touches. No matter how we spent the evening, it ended on the couch with conversation. Of course, I had known for 3 months that I had a girlfriend. My daughters knew. Her kids knew. My friends at work knew. Hell, even my parents and ex-wife knew. But now she was showing me. We grew closer each day as we continued to eat dinner, travel the countryside, and find whatever adventures we could. It was early May, and spring was in the air. Daffodils were blooming and lupines were blooming. The days were warm and the nights were cool. Perfect sleeping weather. Kate called me at work around noon on Friday and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner that night. Of course, I said yes. Then she practically knocked me off my chair by saying, "Pack a small bag. I'm going to make breakfast and then we can look at the boat I found for you." She said it so mundanely that I admittedly almost let it pass my ears. When I realized what she had said, I was at a loss for a moment. Bag? Yes, unless you want to wear your work clothes to the yard." I left work early and rushed to my house to take a shower. Then I showered again. I packed some clothes but put them in my satchel. I didn't want to seem like some weirdo who took a suitcase to his girlfriend's house. So I packed for 3 days. I was ready to stay until Monday morning. Hell, I'd take a day off work and spend the whole week here if I could talk her into it. I pulled up to her house and got in the car. My pulse was racing and my mouth was dry. "Don't think about it too much. Calm down. Calm yourself down. Don't be embarrassed. You've both been working on this since Christmas. Just relax and it'll work out." I worried alternately between being too nervous to stand up and ejaculating as I crossed the threshold of her bedroom. 25 years of marriage, and again it felt like the first time. Then I thought, maybe I'm sleeping in the guest room. She didn't say. Okay, I can do that. Don't expect too much. Everything takes time. That thought brought me both relief and disappointment at the same time. I thought about leaving my backpack in the car in case I was misunderstood, but screw it. She met me at the door. I set my backpack down, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of confusion or disappointment on her face. "You said to pack a bag. I just thought—" Kate smiled. I seemed to amuse her easily. I hoped they didn't get wrinkled. Taking my hand, Kate led me into the kitchen. "I was thinking lasagna and a salad on the side. Does that sound good?" Everything sounds good. So we got into a routine we'd been building for months. We cooked together and drank wine while the lasagna baked. We ate and talked, and she flirted with me in a way she'd never flirted with me before. I was on cloud 9. I didn't eat much that night. My stomach was too nervous for food. We had suppressed our desires for so many months that now I wasn't sure of her intentions. Could this really be the night? I was helping clear the table when I noticed her hands were shaking. Kate, are you okay? You're shaking like a leaf. She laughed softly and looked at the floor, shaking her head. AB, I've only had one man in my life. I'm nervous. And I thought I was the only one nervous today. Now we were laughing together. Did I misunderstand the invitation? No, AB. I'm ready now. With those words, she took my hand and led me to her bedroom. After all the days and evenings I had spent at her house, this was the first time I had been in her bedroom. It was beautiful, warm and inviting, just like Kate's. As soon as we crossed the threshold of her bedroom, we got down to it. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. I made my way to the kitchen, and there waiting for me was Kate's son, Bobby, taking a bite of bacon and sipping his first cup of coffee. Sleep well, AB? The smile on his face couldn't be mistaken for a smile when he caught us. Well, that was awkward. Ah, yes, very well. Thank you. Kate started laughing at my discomfort. Relax, AB. I already told the nosy one that you spent the night. So, what are your intentions for my mother? Smart ass. He grinned from one ear to the other. Well, since you asked, I intend to get some bacon and coffee and then take your mother to bed. Sit down and eat. You'll need your strength for later. Bobby almost choked on his bacon. He knew exactly what Mom and I were up to, but such candor from Mom took him by surprise. We had a breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon, locally made salsa, toast with jam, and washed it all down with good dark coffee. Apparently, Bobby decided he'd had enough of me because breakfast was a nice, family-like atmosphere. I guess after all these months and time together, it really was the beginning of a new family. It felt good, and I wouldn't trade that feeling for anything. Sometime later, after a few more strips of bacon and a few more cups of Kate's excellent coffee, Bobby announced that it was time for him to leave. I walked him to the door, and for the first time since I'd known him, I reached out my hand, which he took and gave me a hug. Welcome to the family, AB. I know Mom is in good hands now. I hated to admit it, but tears came to my eyes as I watched Bobby walk to his car. Are you two doing okay? I turned around and saw Kate standing behind me, smiling. Yes, we're doing fine. From that morning on, Kate and I rarely slept apart. And if we did, it was usually because one of us was working late or traveling. Bobby seemed to make no effort to keep our secret, and soon my daughter started calling and asking leading questions like, if I need to talk to you tonight, where will you be? The first time I heard this, I didn't understand and panicked. What do you mean? Is everything okay? Is something wrong? This phrase became a constant refrain for both of my daughters. Since that first night, my life has only gotten bigger and more fulfilling. My girls started visiting more often and bringing their friends with them. They decided to spend another summer working in labs on campus, but spent more and more time in Maine. Kate's daughter brought her family up north for summer vacation. We have both a house and an apartment, and weekends when all the kids were in town required logistics that only women could organize. Bobby seemed to see my daughters as his sisters and their friends as his. He began to look forward to their visits almost as much as I did. By the end of the summer, I knew what I wanted to do. There is a cute little jewelry store in downtown Portland that has been there forever. The store isn't part of a national chain, and he makes beautiful, one-of-a-kind jewelry, so I paid him a visit. It just so happened that he was nearing retirement, and his daughter took over the business, so she was especially helpful in helping me design the ring. A center ring with a flawless stone and smaller stones on either side of it on a slightly flattened band on top. It was the last weekend of summer, and the whole family was in town. The mood was elevated, and we decided to have a barbecue on the back patio. Steaks were grilled, salads were prepared, and beer and wine poured in rivers. When everyone had finished their meal and conversation resumed, I called everyone to attention. If you will pay attention to me for a moment, everyone here knows my story. A year ago, I was running from my problems. I ended up here with only my girls in the fall, and if I had lived the rest of my life with only these two jewels, I would have died a happy man. But things didn't turn out the way I expected. For the first time in my life, my clumsy nature has worked in my favor. This brought laughter from around the table. I met someone who changed my life. She made me smile again, she made me live again, and she doubled my family. I saw smiles all around the table. I've long thought that I must be the luckiest person in the world, and now I feel like I need to do something about it. With those words, I dropped to one knee. She gasped. What are you doing? Kate was shaking like a leaf. I'm doing something I've wanted to do for a long time. Kate, You gave me my life back and made it better than it ever was. I know this is the life I want today, tomorrow, and forever. I'm asking you to be my wife." The girls held their breath and the men stared at their mother. "Yes, AB, I will marry you." And with those words came cheers of approval, hugs, and I was a grinning fool. There were toasts and congratulations. Bobby asked if his mom was pregnant, and all the girls rolled their eyes. Soon the women retired to the living room to make wedding plans, and Bobby, Gabe, and I were left to watch the sunset. It was the end of August. They say it takes a year to plan a wedding, but we were married in just 2 months. It was late October with the last of the fall colors on the trees. I think a fall wedding is quite appropriate for a couple our age, but I'm not ready to consider that we have the fall of our lives just yet. I envisioned a small wedding with family, but that didn't happen. As soon as word got out about it, the guest list took on a life of its own and grew from 20 people to over 100. Standing at the altar, I marveled at how my life had changed in just 1 short year. My parents, siblings, and Kate were there. I guess we must have good genes because our parents were in their 70s and still going strong. My old friends from Raleigh came too. Along with Kate's friends, my new friends from work and the sailing community came along. Even Karen's parents came to wish me well. Despite everything that happened to their daughter, they never disowned me. It was a full house and lots of love. The reception was one for the record books. The fall air was inviting and the party spilled out of the hall onto the lawn. Like magic, new kegs and bottles appeared, and the band turned up the amps. Kate and I stayed until sunset and quietly left while the party was in full swing. The next morning we met for brunch with the closest family members, and while Kate and I felt great, some of them looked a little underwhelmed. When I told the waitress I liked scrambled eggs, 2 women ran off to the restroom. I gave up my apartment and we settled into Kate's house, but it was short-lived. We soon decided that while Kate had many happy memories with this house, it also had too many bad memories of her first marriage. We set out to find a house to call our own, and settled on a 3-bedroom cottage, finished in shingle, with a large porch that could accommodate the whole family. Property on the water was too expensive for us to consider, but a home in a North Bay shore community 2 blocks from the water and overlooking the harbor was something we could afford. By spring, we had upgraded the kitchen and heating system, and I was looking forward to a summer where my fiancé and I could leave work early, ride the boat before dinner, and watch the last boats pull away to their docks at sunset. It was then that I began to realize that my fiancé would forever surprise me. "Your parents are coming to visit on the 4th of July. Sounds like fun. They came for the holiday and stayed for 3 weeks. The girls would come every weekend with their usual group of friends, and daughter Kate and her family would spend the holiday week too. It was crazy, but we managed. The couples took over the bedrooms, and the young people took over the sofas and sleeping bags. It was a wonderful vacation, and like every time, I missed them when they left. It is now 5 years after the wedding, and I could never have imagined my life today. My friends from Raleigh come to visit every summer. Between friends and family, we rarely have an empty bedroom. My parents decided to become snowbirds. They spend summers with us in Maine and winters in Raleigh. Dad, who was in the Navy decades ago, took up sailing as if he was born to do it, and now we sail all summer on Casco Bay and the waters off the coast of Maine. Mom and Kate join us when they're not exploring antique stores and used bookstores along the coast. Kate's parents have grown close to mine, and now they're spending the worst of the Maine winter in North Carolina. Rose and Gabe had a second child, a son. When his company didn't want to transfer him back to Maine, he left them and found a new position here. After a few quick promotions, his business was doing better than if he had stayed in North Carolina. Ben turned out to be a keeper, and a year after he and Claire graduated, he asked my permission to marry my daughter. I readily approved her choice, and they were married in June. Their first child was due in 2 months. Denise has graduated and found a good job in Portland. She brings her young man with her when she comes to visit, and I suspect we will continue to see him. Bobby still plays the field, but Kate is sure that when the right girl comes along, he will fall hopelessly under her influence. Kate, always surprising me, announced 2 summers ago that my former in-laws were coming to visit for the week of the 4th of July. I didn't expect this turn of events, but Kate believes in building bridges, and they've always treated me with love. It turned out to be a delightful week. My parents are here, Kate's parents came over, and the kids were in the house as often as they could be. I thought all of this was already as weird as can be, but Kate had another surprise in store for me. Have you seen it happen? No. Not in my wildest fantasies or worst nightmares did I expect this. In late July, she quietly and calmly sat me down at the table and announced that Karen would be staying with us the first weekend in August. What? Your ex-wife is coming for the weekend? I know how you feel about her, but it's time to bury the hatchet for good. Your daughters need to know that their parents can get along, and she feels abandoned when the girls live here. And whose fault is that? I know, but it's time. She can't hurt you anymore. I'll admit there was a dark cloud hanging over our house for a few days after that, but eventually I got over it. It was just a weekend, right? I guess Karen was still lonely. I always knew Frank wasn't a keeper, and she realized it when he moved on to younger pastures. During the visit, she avoided any mention of Frank or our divorce, except to offer me her only sincere apology. After all, we were getting along well enough that I saw brief glimpses of the girl I had once loved and married. Although Kate had set out to establish some sort of friendship with Karen, I couldn't help but notice that she was unusually loud that night when we went to bed. Always demonstrative, Kate was usually quiet enough to keep our relationship a secret. That night, she made sure Karen heard. And here I am, living 600 miles from where I thought I would spend my life. My plans to become a ghost and disappear have failed miserably. I have a new life, a new wife, a family twice the size I imagined, with grandchildren and friends who enrich my life every day. I have love all around me, and it doesn't get any better than that. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.